So we're with two wonderful people here at London Climate Action Week 2026 who have played a very important role this year in climate action with the Santa Marta Conference in Colombia, hosted by the Netherlands and Colombia. Can you say who you are and where you're from?
Stientje van Veldhoven, and I'm Minister for Climate, Energy and Green Transition in the Netherlands.
Irene Vélez Torres, Minister of Environment from Colombia.
So you have a report, I believe, on the outcomes or the success, the great success of your conference in Santa Marta. What was that saying and what were you telling the people here? Would you like to go first?
The report presents a very diversified perspective on climate action, climate justice, and the phasing out of fossil fuels. We have tried to make a space for the social movements, the indigenous peoples, the Afro-descendants, all those radical and often denied voices in climate action. They have been involucrated in the report. So it's not only a report about what governments are ready to do, because we are the coalition of the doing, but also what civil society is there to be pushing for and to be accompanying us with. So.
How did you feel the reaction was from the people here in London at London Climate Action Week when you were presenting this report?
I felt we had great response. I think people are ready for action. People want to focus on what we can do, and that is very much the spirit of Santa Marta. A coalition of the doers, not just governments, because business, civil society, we all have a role to play. It's all of us, all the time, everywhere. That's how we'll get rid of fossil fuels.
Next steps, where do you go from here? I mean, I know there's been a change of government in your country, but the coalition of the doing, the willing, but doing, I like doing actually, that's quite nice. Just renamed as a good idea. Started off as the willing and now it's the doing. That goes ahead. Governments come and go in different political complexities. But I was getting feedback from some people today in our shows, interviewing them, that they think more governments will join by COP31 in Turkey, jointly run by Australia. What are your steps? Are you going to present something there?
We just had a meeting with the coordination group, which is very important in order to launch what is going to happen and the actual work that we have to start doing. And now we have 3 work streams that need to start making sure that countries have the tools to accomplish the doing that we promised in Santa Marta. So by the end of the summer, we hope that the 3 work streams are gonna fully on in the work, coordinating with the governments, but also with civil society. That's part of the Santa Marta spirit that we want to continue being there in the coming work.
Okay. And of course, we're starting to collaborate already with the new 2 co-chairs of Tuvalu and Ireland, who are going to take over from us as from COP. And in the meantime, like Irene said, the work will be kicked off. But of course, we're also going to work towards moving back into, or at least feeding back into the COP process in Turkey. Because of course, it's very important. This is not a closed club. All the countries that want to start doing, that want to participate in finding those ways, because it's hard for all of us to transition away from fossil fuels, are welcome to join. So we want to make sure that we create at COP also a moment where we can report on the progress, but also have an open invitation for other countries that want to join us.
So you may be interested to know, I mean, We Don't Have Time is the world's largest media for climate change, but we also have a foundation linked with it. And the foundation is launching on Thursday a tracker for the Santa Marta initiative, process, whatever we're going to call it, which is tracking very simply who's in, who might like to be in, and who's against, right? So we got so they're in red. The ones against are in red. We know who they are anyway. It's not too many. And then the ones who are sort of, well, yeah, interested, they're orange. Colombia is green, certainly right now, and you're green as well, and all the other 55 countries that were there in Colombia. So we are hoping to lend this or provide this as an incentive to encourage a tracker.
Coalition of the doers, right? Everybody can contribute and participate. It's not just the government. It's all of us, all the time, everywhere, taking those steps that we can take. That is how we'll be moving away. So we'll be looking forward to looking at your tracker.
Yes, excellent. And I just want a final message saying that a transition of government in Colombia doesn't mean that Santa Marta legacy is not going to continue. And we have designed a very particular methodology, very dynamic, in which we are 2 countries launching the first conference, then 2 other countries are coming in, and now we are also engaging with other coalitions. So we are sure that this is going to be embraced by many countries, by many initiatives, and by the social movements. I am certain that the civil society will have this report as a tool to continue moving forward in climate action.
And you may be pleased to know you're in a country, the United Kingdom. I think I can say this because I'm UK. Where as a journalist in the mid-1990s, one government cancelled all the renewable energy activity in this country, even the research projects, on one cold night in the House of Commons in December. And here today we stand in the UK with one of the most powerful offshore wind producers in the world. Things can change very quickly.
Hopefully.
Politics doesn't change, let's say, technology developments, right? Technology development and innovation are driving this transition now. The transition will happen because it's the better thing to do. And we will see this happening. Electrification is going to be the route towards the future. And let's hope that we can get this at the biggest speed while transitioning away from the fossil fuels.
And what you're doing is basically, hopefully, ensuring that it doesn't just change, but it changes faster than it would do if there was no political will.
Yes, political will and support, because also the coalitions and the other countries are here to support each other, engage with each other. Solidarity is the base of what we are doing here, as much as the willingness.
Thank you very much indeed, and best of luck. And yeah, we'll see you soon, I'm sure. So, welcome to London Climate Action Week here in 2026. We're in County Hall. We are being hosted, thank you very much indeed, by Sustainable Ventures. We're very close to the House of Commons on the other side, and we're in the thick of the action here in 2026. We don't have time. We cover many of the major conferences to do with climate change and many other events linked with climate change. That's obviously why we're in London. But not so long ago, we were actually in Santa Marta, Colombia, because there was the first conference to transition away from fossil fuels, which was hosted by the government of Colombia and by the Netherlands. And we were also the official global media partner for that. So we were very honored. It was a bit different. You know, normally when you think of the big climate conferences, you think of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change, the annual COPs as they're called. But this wasn't really about massive negotiations in Santa Marta. These were countries who had already decided that they wanted to phase out, to exit from fossil fuels. And they wanted to work out with others and with experts how indeed you do this, whether you're a so-called rich country like the United Kingdom or a poorer country, say, like Angola. To help us understand why this conference was important, what was this all about, perhaps also where we go with this interesting new development, I've got some wonderful guests with me here in London. So I've got Professor Francesco Corvaro, who is Special Envoy for Climate Change with the government of Italy. Welcome, nice to see you.
Thank you.
I've got Johanna, is it Johanna? Johanna Guzman, who's a Senior Attorney, Center for International Environmental Law. Super. Jodianne Wang, or Wang. I live in Germany, right? So I'm almost saying Wang. I'm pronouncing the W's as V. It's Wang. Okay. Jodianne Wang, Research and Policy Consultant with the Fossil Fuel Treaty Initiative. And Amira Sawas, Head of Research and Policy at the Fossil Fuel Treaty Initiative as well. Okay, Amira, you have to leave a little bit early today, so we're going to kick off with you first. Just kick us off with what was the Santa Marta conference and why was it, in your view, necessary?
Well, it's really interesting to be talking about this today as we are sitting in a potentially 38-degree heat wave in London, which is unprecedented. We have this issue of climate change and climate impacts that we're feeling, but it's taken a really long time to talk about the root cause. 86% of the carbon in the atmosphere that's driving heat waves like this today is coming from fossil fuels, oil, coal, and gas. And we don't have a plan to justly, fairly, quickly enough to transition away from them being our kind of key energy source, to phase them down and phase them out. There's no process at the moment currently where we have enough of a plan that all countries are able to kind of collaborate together on doing that in line with preventing, a catastrophe, which is what we're heading towards in terms of climate impacts. And so, I personally have been in the climate negotiations in the COPs, or the annual meetings where everyone gets together from different countries to talk about how to address the climate crisis. And I know very well that in that setting, it's too high stakes for some countries to agree on making a plan to transition away from fossil fuels. So the idea came up, that maybe we need a creative space. Maybe we need a space that's not as high stakes, where you can talk about what the barriers are that all types of different countries are facing to actually address this issue. I think that there's a feeling in the climate negotiations that the kind of different barriers are not sufficiently addressed in that forum. So just as one example, you have big financial barriers for countries in the global south. So you mentioned Angola, for example. That is a country that I think over 90% of its revenue base depends on oil, but it also really struggles to access financing for other forms of, economic revenue base and diversification. So there's a big structural barrier there, which is about the international financial system and how countries like Angola can actually access finance to make those plans. So the idea was there. Why don't we have countries who are interested in having this conversation get together and talk about those barriers and talk about ways that we can actually start to address those barriers, which isn't so high stakes that it leads to the entire thing collapsing. And that was the rationale.
Okay. Maybe we could say one thing, and I sometimes feel we have to say this. Maybe you agree or maybe you disagree, but the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change has delivered some positive things in its years, and I don't think we should avoid that, the Paris Agreement being one of them, and also the amazing penetration now we're seeing with renewable energy, which I think has been inspired by the fact there was that process with governments under the UNFCCC, always bringing forward the possibility that they'd really have to do something, and certainly the economics of renewables have gone very well. That doesn't mean we don't need this initiative, but I think just recognizing that some things have been positive. Just lastly, the Fossil Fuel Treaty Initiative, quickly, for those that don't know, because there may be some people that don't out there watching this, what is it?
Yeah.
And why? And well, congratulations. It's played a very important role that led us to COP28 in Dubai, where we first got governments saying we want to talk about this, we want to do something about it, exiting fossil fuels, and then of course in Belém in Brazil, and whatever, but just what is the treaty specifically about?
Yeah, and just to add to the point you made, the UNFCCC has achieved a huge amount. Having countries to agree on a target that's based in what's called common but differentiated responsibility. So basically in terms of global justice has been absolutely critical. I think the challenge is that it's a consensus-based process where one country or a group, small group of countries can, whatever concerns they may have, can kind of stall progress. The fossil fuel treaty idea emerged as, okay, we have this consensus process and it's come up with this goal to limit, the catastrophe and keep warming of the planet to under 1.5 degrees. And we have this goal which is based on emissions and warming, but it doesn't actually address the root cause, which is fossil fuels. So the idea was, okay, well, maybe what we need to do is with countries that are willing to get together, start talking about how you address the root cause of fossil fuels and how you actually develop a plan to phase them out in line with CBDR, common but differentiated responsibilities, so that every country involved feels like they're They have support. They have the financial support. They have the means technically to do it. And there's a coalition working together. So that was the idea. We now have 18 countries with us. They're all from the global south, living on the front lines of the crisis and facing the biggest barriers. And what we're also trying to do is to develop cooperative mechanisms between those countries that will overcome some of the barriers that they're facing. So some of the financial barriers, you mentioned renewable energy. The African continent has the highest potential for renewable energy in the world, but has received less than 3% of the financing. That's to do with the international financial system. So we're working on mechanisms that can help African countries, for example, access financing for their renewables and their economic diversification. There are also huge barriers in the trade system, and that's not something that's been easy for the UNFCCC to deal with, right? So there are new forms of trade that countries that are interested in transitioning, both those who produce fossil fuels and who consume them and are dependent on them, they can come up with new forms of trade where they can phase down together, manage the volatility, of the energy markets, and basically cooperate towards this vision that these countries have together. So that's the idea. And a lot of it is about testing and trying new things and enabling countries to see a pathway and have a sense of agency rather than get stuck into, the very understandable polarization that sometimes emerges in a global consensus process.
Okay. Julianne, so you were also in Santa Marta in your capacity as a finance expert. What can you tell us about what you saw there?
I think Santa Marta was incredibly refreshing in terms of talking about climate finance. For so long, talking about the space that we had before, which is the UNFCCC. I think the approach that we had to talk about finance was kind of what some call plug and play, or in my mind, like a sort of plumbing, where if we're just talking about the number, we're talking about the how much, and we're not talking so much about the how. So if we just get the figure agreed, and then somehow the money will flow, and then the problem will be okay. But then actually, if we take a step back and take into account what Mira just said about the different ways of power and politics in the financial system, just because we agree on a figure doesn't mean that everybody will be happy, or it doesn't mean that the problem will be solved, right? So in Santa Marta, what we were able to do was to name what is it in the financial system that's currently challenging, blocking, being barriers to money flowing. So we're thinking about the how, and also thinking about the fact that, the UNFCCC consensus-based system, but a lot of the financial institutions where money moves is not a consensus-based system, in the sense that, not every single country has the same vote. That voting power is differentiated, right? So in Santa Marta, we were able to talk about, investor-state dispute settlement, which I'm sure Johanna could talk about much more. We were able to talk about, name fossil capitalism, which is the political economy that we live in today, that's being organized around the extraction, use, consumption of fossil fuels, and the fact that we need to move away from it. Or, previously we talk about how there is not enough money. But in Santa Marta, we were able to say, well, where do those money go? And what do we have to do about it to bring them back to climate and climate justice? So I think in many ways, for those of us who are in Santa Marta and looking at finance, it was refreshing because at least we were able to start naming the problem at hand.
And to get this right, I mean, I've been involved in climate change as well since, the late 1980s, more in the communications and journalist side. But are you really saying that those conversations about finance never happened at the UNFCCC? Or
No.
did they just happen over coffee?
They were happening, but I think civil society, a lot of LDCs, least developed countries, small island states, were talking about the financial structure at play, and the way that it was, blocking their access or the availability of finance. They were happening. Let me not take credit away from decades of movement to try to get those conversations into the
because
center.
I think of all the endless press conferences that go on at the UNFCCC.
Right. But the thing is, in the negotiation room, because of the power imbalances, they were never able to be the driving factor.
So they never rose up into the actual halls of negotiations.
Or even if they were in there, it was being shut down.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay.
There was gaslighting happening. Right? So that's why Santa Marta was also refreshing.
Okay. Just one more question to you, Julianne. Do you see initiatives like the Transition Away Conference as bringing anything new to the table in terms of securing financing? And I think it's not just you're having honest conversations, but one thing that struck me was people actually actively talking about how did China do this green economy thing in the last 10, 11 years. That was an interesting conversation going on because we had one of the architects of that coming in by the magic of Zoom, I think, telling everybody exactly how he got involved and how they did it. And I think there were even fines, weren't there? There were fines against people running different areas of China. If they didn't deliver on certain things, they were fined. I think green loans or things like that. This was kind of interesting as well. I don't know if we could do that in Europe, but anyway. Anything particular that just comes to mind that was?
I think seeing the way that the Colombian government, obviously with the recent election, a lot could be, at stake here, and the Dutch government, a lot of the governments they're representing talking about finance was a way for us to think about, okay, then, we have countries who are producers, right? We have countries who are like 100% import. So the financing cost and opportunities to the transition will be really different, but we could sit together and think about, okay, then what do alternatives look like? I can say, a new fund will come out of it because I think we still have a lot of unpacking to do of the existing fund that's out there and the challenges and the bureaucratic, constraints that they have. But I think it's opening a channel for us to not just critique the financial system, but think about what alternatives could look like.
Yeah, because new funds, I mean, there's been many created under the UNFCCC, and they always end up with sort of using old English money, 5 shillings and 6pence. But, that's right. So maybe it's not new funds. Yeah, or maybe it is. Who knows? Johanna, the organisation you work for played an important role in SEAL, isn't it? Do we say SEAL? Okay, yeah. Played an important role in the academic dialogues in Santa Marta. Tell us a little bit about your work at the conference and what was achieved there from your perspective.
Yes, so colleagues worked really closely on what was alluded to before, the investor-state dispute settlement system, which is a rather large barrier to a lot of what we need to have in place for fossil fuel phase-outs to begin. And this is sort of the idea that it's a rather unjust system that exists where investors can sue countries for taking serious action on climate and things like this. So I think some really important discussions were had in the academic space and with civil society on how it is that we can overcome these style barriers. There was also a colleague that led on petrochemicals and ensuring that all aspects of fossil fuels were included in eventual phase-out discussions. And then, of course, we were there to also speak to the latest International Court of Justice advisory opinion on climate change and what that means for phase-out. And, of course, I will say this till I'm blue in the face. My favorite paragraph out of the whole wonderful advisory opinion is that 4227, which really is strong statement that when there is failure to protect the climate system, including through fossil fuel production, consumption, exploratory licensure, and subsidies, it could eventually be considered an internationally wrongful act attributable to a state. So that was, I think, a really strong position in which to come to these discussions within, we're only coming up to a year from the advisory opinions putting forth. So I think that having those discussions embedded into the setup of the conference is a really wonderful thing.
Of course, cynics would say, well, the Americans they don't back this court, or, others. But if, 190 odd countries in the world decided to back it, then countries like the United States have to go, oh, okay, we're not on the train. Oh, damn, maybe we better climb on board because the rest of the world
100%.
is going in this direction. So, so we have to also deal with the cynics when we come up with these positive examples from Santa Marta. They're still out there, the cynics.
Of course.
And ISDS, I mean, just explain what that word means again.
Yeah, investor-state dispute settlement.
And the legal relationships between two countries or more countries, which some of them are quite old, they go back a long time.
Yeah,
maybe they weren't
agreements.
designed to support fossil fuel companies, but fossil fuel companies can use that law
Correct.
sue another country if they want to get off fossil fuels?
You could be an expert now, too.
You too can be an expert.
And if I
You are
may,
allowed. Well, you've got to remember, we've got one other guest here as well.
I apologise.
Okay.
There's just one point on that, which is that fossil fuel companies are the biggest users of ISDS.
Yeah.
Of all of the use of that as a
Throughout
mechanism.
history or
Now, to date, and the amount of fossil fuel claims has skyrocketed in the last 10 years.
Yeah.
So if you look at the difference of claims between 1992 to 2000 and 2000 to now, they've completely skyrocketed, I think, over 10 times. So I think CL has actually done some interesting research on that. It's in the multiple billions.
No, I wasn't remotely suggesting. I was just trying to point out that it's a long-standing legal structure that perhaps if you really go back into the early sediments of history and start digging around, maybe nobody ever imagined that it would get used and abused as it is being doing by some of the fossil fuel companies. Yeah. Correct. But that's the thing about the law, isn't it? People are always interpreting it and for their maximum benefit. Let's go to Professor Tuvalu?
Yes,
okay,
correct.
Thank you. You represented Italy in Santa Marta. Why did the Italian government send you all that way to do an important job?
So, first of all, thanks for having me. And Italy believes in the energy transition, so we are investing in this moment, in this direction. But I have several thoughts about Santa Marta. First of all, I would like to underline a good feelings that you can see in Santa Marta in comparison to the COP. For which reason? In my opinion, for the first time, and this is one of the most important success of Santa Marta, is the capability to put around the same table different countries that normally are in opposite sides, the global north and global south. Italy is part of global north, and there are several countries of global south, but at the same time, they were involved in the same discussion to find a way to transitioning away from fossil fuel, because the mistake that a lot of time we can do thinking about this is that the transitioning way is a problem of only of a country like Italy that import fossil fuel. But this is not only the main issue. We have another important issue connected with the developing countries that export the fossil fuel, and their economy is based on this. So if we really want to create a roadmap for transitioning way, we need to think out of the box. We need to think to reduce the dependence of fossil fuel for a country like Italy, but we need to improve the economy of the developing countries that are based right now in fossil fuel exportation. Another important thing that I recognized in Santa Marta was the leadership of the Colombia and Netherlands ministers. They remained there for the entire time, enter in the discussion panels. They gave their time to this mission to obtain this target. And this is a real good starting point, because we don't have time.
Yes.
So it is a really good starting point. The real challenge, in my opinion, right now is how we can translate this feeling, this success, this first step in the negotiation, in the COP. Because unfortunately, or fortunately, it's up to you, the main theater of the climate negotiation is the UNFCCC. Mm-hmm. So we need to find a way to cooperate, to create an integration between what we are building in the Santa Marta process, if you want to call it this way, and what happens every year in the COP. Because sometimes I recognize a difference. There is a lot of limit inside the COP for the two different team, if you want, global south and global north. Instead, I didn't see this in Santa Marta, but everyone were involved to find solution, to propose solution. The last aspect, in my opinion, and this could be very important, the role of Santa Marta is to create a real bridge with the main countries that are not present in Santa Marta, the biggest emitters, US, Russia, India, China, and so on. If the target, it is important to remember this, and this is not a political aspect, this is a scientific aspect. If our target is to propose a solution for the climate, for the global climate, we need to remain and to open the doors to all the main actors in this. Otherwise, we can do a wonderful energy transition, we can increase the renewable, what we want, but we can't reach the target of the Paris Agreement in the global climate, because climate is something that has no border and has a planetary dimension.
Mm-hmm. Good. Amira, you have to go, because I don't know where you have to go, but you have to go. So thank you for being with us, and we will carry on this conversation.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Slightly less rich because you will no longer be here, but we'll do our best.
Good luck. Thanks.
Thank you. So one thing that came up in Santa Marta, of course, was that countries are supposed to draft strategies for how they will phase down and exit fossil fuels. Or at least phase down anyway. We had one presented there, which was from France. I would talk to the British delegate there and asked her, would the UK be doing such a thing? And she said, yes. And I said, well, amazed you don't have one already. They went, well, it's sort of there, but it's scattered across different documents. It needs to be brought together into one place. Did Colombia provide something, or they were thinking about providing something? Did they provide anyway, it doesn't matter. But what about Italy? Are you going to be working on a plan specifically on this topic? Yeah.
Yes, we are working on this plan. For example, we started to reduce the production, and now we are closing the production of electricity from coal in the continental part. We have only one plant in Sardinia, but we are planning to close in 2028 after the creation of the link under the sea. The idea of Prime Minister Pichetto is to keep this facility only for safety, not for use, because also the cost is very high. So the idea of Italy is working with a science-based roadmap. So starting from the most pollution resources and coming to reduce all the other. Obviously, in Europe, we have a really different situation. France has a huge production of nuclear power plant, and thanks to this, they can accelerate in some way in this direction. We need more time. In Italy, we are investing a lot in renewable energies. We are thinking also to open a door for a new technology in the nuclear sector, like a small modular reactor. But as you know, Italy has a particular shape, a particular position in the Mediterranean area, and it's not so easy to implement big solar panel system, but we are working to this. We are investing in the battery storage, because remember that it's not possible to improve the production of electricity throughout the renewable energies without a good smart grid and moreover a big storage in battery. We are testing a new solution for battery storage, like battery made by salt, so without using the rare earth
metals.
So we are working in this direction, because the target is to achieve the reduction of fossil fuel not only for environmental needs, but also for security and resilience.
Of course, yes. But every country is, in theory, going to be producing. I suppose the poorer countries will need some kind of support from somewhere to work on their plans. But has this not all come at a very interesting time, right? Because we had this, well, I think we have to be honest, a failed attempt to overthrow the Iranian government by the United States, leading to the blocking of the Straits of Hormuz. And at the same time, you can't almost not turn your eye away from LinkedIn to see yet another report of another country where the renewables has now overtaken the fossil fuels, right? I mean, last one I looked at was Chile, but there must be, I mean, you're seeing the penetration of renewables really skyrocketing right now. You can see, as you mentioned, storage. I mean, I think it was IRENA, the International Renewable Energy Agency, that brought out that report just recently saying that there is nowhere in the world now where fossil fuels are competitive when you combine renewables with storage. And these are, so this is, you couldn't even imagine exiting from fossil fuels 30 years ago, 20 years ago. Maybe at Paris you could start seeing the possibility of exiting from fossil fuels. If you were a developing country, you might be able to see it. So things are all aligning, are they not, in some ways, in a positive way? So where do you expect what happened in Santa Marta to go from here? Where do you expect it to land in the COP? Is it going to be a conversation, a presentation, do you think, of what happened in Santa Marta to the parties, to the governments at the next UN climate conference? Or what would you like it to be? Maybe that's the other way of phrasing it. Anybody want to?
I'll take a first stab. I mean, I definitely, going on with what you were saying, I think for sure this Strait of Hormuz and the current geopolitical standing of stuff certainly was a catalyst to countries really realizing we have to decouple fossil fuels from energy security. And of course, that's going to lead us to the type of conversations that needed to happen in Santa Marta. And a lot of the ones that we are not having currently around COP, because you can't yet really say fossil fuel phase out in just transition, even because you have all the countries we know, the petro states that will shut it down. And so I think being able to continue to have these open conversations in the Santa Marta process, the fact that it's coming to Tuvalu in 2027, I think we need to have those safe spaces and then continue to build a coalition of countries that can be brought on so that mechanisms can come of and actual solutions come of it. What could that look like in connection to COP? I think will a lot depend on certain countries and what they wish to do. I think for sure we should see an uptake and an acceleration of transitioning away from fossil fuels plans happening in countries themselves, perhaps even regionally would be a great one. I know the Pacific is one of those regions that are looking into that. And I think the more we see this building, the better off we're all going to be, right? I don't like it's not about competing spaces of these things. At the end of the day, we just want there to be solutions. This is the majority of the world. And I think something like this will be a basis for being able to get there.
Brazil, for example, still has the presidency until when it opens at the COP. Then there is a period of time, maybe 30 minutes to 1 hour, it could be somewhere in that space, where they say the COP is going to be hosted by Turkey in cooperation with Australia. Does everybody agree? Everybody agrees, bang, the gavel goes down. And then Turkey and Australia take over. So there is a bit at the beginning where Brazil could report back on Santa Marta, right? That could be a perfect role for Brazil.
And they were quite, involved during the process in Santa Marta as well, because there's a stake for Brazil. And I also think what conferences like Santa Marta was doing was, in a way, create FOMO, not competition, but create FOMO that there is a coalition of willing countries who are willing to engage on these issues. The big green states or the big historical polluters out there, you have to get involved in the conversation at some point, because the recent geopolitical events is showing you over and over again and again that adherence to a fossil capital economy is not sustainable. It fuels war and militarism, it fuels social inequity, it damages public health, a whole suite of issues. So I hope that it can be an opportunity to create FOMO, but also for the people who are in Santa Marta, I think we will be able to go to COP with a more refreshed and renewed energy as well on an individual basis. And I think that does a lot for the environment that we're engaging in. Now, on content, because of the energy plans that are we hope to see more of, and also in the UNFCCC space, we have national determined contributions, we have national adaptation plans, a lot of different planning cycles and a lot of different plans, right? So we need to make sure that they align, but also I think as a researcher, we need to devote more effort to see how the cross-border dynamics of these different plans. So they're not staying within the unit of the national, the sovereign state, but also the knock-on effects of all these different planning on finance, on energy security, on energy sovereignty, all of that. So I hope that's something that we can do moving forward as well.
We need some wins, though. Please, Professor.
You mentioned Irina in the beginning. My friend Francesco La Camera in Santa Marta said that in his opinion, with the crisis that we had in the Hormuz, we could see probably the end of the era of fossil fuel. In my opinion, this could be really true because for the first time, I recognize a sort of awareness in the common people. In Italy, a lot of people, also people that you can meet in the street, recognize that the dependence of fossil fuel could be an issue in their life. And this is the first time for the cost of gasoline, what you want, but for the first time, the awareness is in this direction. And if the public opinion can enter really in this kind of discussion, probably at the political level, it is necessary to recognize these new needs. In my dream, I have a dream, why not, in Santa Marta, in my opinion, we could see a new sort of alliance for the next negotiation, and a transversal alliance with different countries, not the normal negotiator team, that could really implement and propose solution, because during the COP you had the opportunity to listen a lot of words, a lot of speech, a lot of discussions, but we need to have results and solutions, and Santa Marta could be an accelerator in this direction, in my opinion.
So you could imagine, and this is now, I mean, this isn't I don't have a dream, I'm just thinking about it really, is that increasingly, if more and more countries go to the flag of the of the transition away from fossil fuels, and the COP itself is just dominated by a relatively small number of countries that don't want any action, then the COP in a sense is going to become less and less relevant if over here there are more and more countries going to a different process that is less combative and matches the needs of the majority of nations. So indeed, there is a potential that those that try to stop the exiting from fossil fuels or the phasing down find the institution that they're using to do that less and less relevant for the vast majority of countries. Do you see what I mean? Absolutely. So this means that these are very interesting times politically. Yeah. And it doesn't mean the end of multilateralism. It just might mean multilateralism is more like 190 countries, not 193. So,
that's a dream. That's good. But I think just with what you're saying, it would be really lovely in this building of coalition. And we always say this in a lot of the fossil fuel treaty kind of spaces, but beyond, is that it needs to not be a race to sell the final barrel of oil, but actually the race to get us to the types of technologies and the types of world we need to live in where we can thrive, people and planet.
So how one thing I wonder though is, you see, the UNFCCC was created in such a way that when a government hosted a COP, if basically there was really very little process, they would create outcomes with new instruments, new policies, or new work programs to say, but we've got a work program on this, or we've got a work program on that. And so it's like everyone's a great success, bang the gavel, everyone goes home. And then it would happen again and again and again. I mean, the whole process there is loaded with stuff, right? It's a really heavy basket, right, full of things. The question is, with the Santa Marta initiative, process, I don't know what we call it, but how do you ensure that it remains laser focused on what it wants to achieve, rather than a kind of church, a broad church in which everybody's hopes and dreams are loaded into, because then it becomes a mirror image of the COP potentially, and not nimble, not agile, not fast, efficient. You know, these are, I mean, we could debate all day what different structures might emerge from all this, but it's important that it doesn't become just a mirror image of the COP.
I'll try to kind of address, and some thoughts came up while you were saying it. I think partly the issue at hand is that there were so many topics we need to address because, you know, the climate crisis is such a, you know, cuts across our way of life, right? And it's a, you know, call to question of our existing way of life. So it's not so much to me the problem that there's so many topics we need to go through, but that they're so siloed from one another, right? They're vertically in depth, but they don't speak horizontally to each other. And I can give you an example because, you know, for the last few years, I've been in the space of the just transition negotiations and the climate finance negotiations. If you go into the finance room and you talk about just transition, global financial architecture, they say, go to the just transition space. In just transition, if you bring up the issue of finance, they say, well, we have dedicated tracks for finance. So I don't have as much of a fear of Santa Marta-like processes addressing a multitude of issues at once, but they just have to make sure that we speak across and they're overlapping and interlocking kind of connections and knock-on effects with each other. Yeah.
In my opinion, what it is evident, but not only connected to Santa Marta, that in my opinion, in the UN, it is necessary to have a sort of upgrade. So it is necessary to start to change something, to reduce the bureaucracy, to increase the efficiency. Obviously, is a big box created a lot of years ago. So the world is changing a lot. So probably it's time to think also in this direction, that it's time to renovate also the structure behind the UNFCCC. For example, we have, but it's only an example, we have 3 different framework for the climate: the desertification, the biodiversity, and climate. But the biggest one is the climate, and it is possible to involve everything, to have a great discussion that is, as you say, transversal for several reasons. This could be increase the efficiency of the process. So in my opinion, it is necessary that inside the UN this kind of awareness will increase. Otherwise, it could be a real issue in the future, because you can have a big elephant like the COP and last have that initiative more efficient than the COP itself. But the COP, as I told in the beginning, remained the main now is the main actor in the negotiation. So it is necessary to use all the instruments that we have.
So, I mean, this relationship between the other so-called Rio conventions of 1992, so climate change, biodiversity, and desertification, wasn't there one more? No, there were 3, weren't there? Is a very relevant point. But I suppose it gets back to the point I was making before, which is that the climate COP became a place where those other treaties that weren't working so well, people dumped a lot of stuff into the UN climate conference thinking that somehow that would resolve. So forests would be sorted out through the lens of climate change. You know, I mean, there's the International Forum of Forests. I mean, there's another place where people gather, right? And land desertification or land degradation, desertification always sounds like you have something after the main course. That's dessert, though. That got kind of sucked into the UN COP on climate change because there were no resources in the other treaties. So it thought, we'll handle it through the climate COP. This is how, the multilateral process evolves over time, and it never seems to get more efficient. It seems to get less efficient, right? And it's not the fault of the UN, it's the fault of the governments who load it up that way. You're raising a whole bunch of really fascinating issues. Completely. Yeah, fascinating issues, right?
Yeah. It is obviously
how human beings run the world is really interesting.
The target should be different, but right now I participated to two COPs of desertification, so probably it's time to find a solution behind this. As I told in the beginning, a sort of update. This is only an idea, but could be also different. What it is evident, it is necessary to upgrade what we created a lot of years ago, to adapt to new kind of situation in a climate crisis that is increasing a lot the consequences, and it's time, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I think going back to your point about needing to stay laser focused, what was so refreshing and important about Santa Marta is that we could speak freely about the root cause of climate change, fossil fuels, and that we need to have plans of phasing down and what that means for the variety of countries that were there. And so as it stands, because we don't have a good update or countries that are honest about the problem, we can't have that conversation at COP. And so that's why I think keeping that laser focus on fossil fuels and making sure that we have solutions like we've talked about, things that make sure countries are phasing down and phasing out. Because without those plans, it's going to be hard that anyone can do it.
Yes, because we need progress on the Santa Marta thing. There has to be some success along this journey. The first conference being a great success, right? I think we're all like, wow, that's amazing. And so celebrate that. But then, we can't just have a celebration, or the world can't just have a celebration in Tuvalu next year. It has to show some progress between Colombia and Tuvalu. And that could be more countries joining, of course, because potentially there are, 80 plus, because in Belém there were 80 plus countries. How one moves this, I'd like to say, beautiful wind sailing ship forward. I don't want to say a big container powered by container ship. How we move this nimble, beautiful wind ship from Colombia to Tuvalu, gathering more wind ships along the way to a better future. And I think that that's an NGO job, or probably a government job as well.
I believe that we have also a step in the middle that is the pre-COP in the Pacific area. This could be a great opportunity, particularly for the indigenous people, to increase the attention around the climate.
And do you hear conversations of other governments that might be thinking about joining in Tuvalu? So there is some positive signals coming?
Yes, I think we were good at creating FOMO. I think through
FOMO,
Bond.
fear of missing out.
Exactly. That's a positive thing.
Yeah. You get that feeling too?
Hopefully, and I think we're trying to create FOMO through designing financial mechanisms as well, as that it's not just, those who are interested and committed to the transitioning away, do it, and then everyone else can roam free and keep, heavy production. No, we're trying to use the finance as a lever to create that FOMO as well. Solidarity charges, point of entry, point of sale charges, etc., and also financial support, revenue replacement for the transitioning away. So little levers of FOMO.
I think something else I've also noticed as well is that, before Santa Marta and just after Donald Trump took his second time in office, the White House, between that, there was initially a lot of companies in Europe and in Europe too, and America, of course, were like, no, we don't really want to talk about what we're doing in terms of climate action. Let's keep it low, right? Let's not get out there and say, we're doing this, we're doing this. And yet, suddenly you're starting to see companies suddenly going, no, actually, we do want to talk about what we're doing on climate change. We want to be involved. You know, we want to get back where we need to be, assisting in terms of the movement to decarbonisation. So I think you're going to see the private sector probably, it was on show a little bit in Santa Marta, but I think it's going to be more on show as we move forward.
3 weeks ago, I participated to a ministerial meeting in Copenhagen, and OECD presented a report. And in the first sentence of the report was written that despite of the political discussion that seems to be underestimate the climate, you mentioned the new administration in the US, the private sector remains strongly involved in the energy transition, in investing in the renewable energies, in the new technology. And this report was very interested because put in evidence how sometimes the narrative can be different in what we can see, listen to the paper. So the private sector remain really involving in this kind of discussion. I saw a lot of CEO of different company in Santa Marta during the COP, during other meetings in Copenhagen. So, and the report put in evidence particularly this aspect, the private sector that remain involved in the climate.
And it's a strong message coming from We Mean Business Coalition and from others as well. So, okay, I think we have to wrap it up there. It's a good conversation. We haven't got the final answer to this one, but we are on a journey, or let's say we've always been on a journey, but now we've got another way of maybe getting faster to the final end point of this journey, which is from Santa Marta to maybe somewhere better. So fingers crossed. I don't know what you say in Italy, but you say fingers crossed in Britain?
Yes.
You do. In Germany, they say thumbs.
No, it's the same.
Okay, fingers crossed. The Germans go thumbs together. I live in Berlin. It seems a very strange thing to do, but anyway, that's what they do. Okay, thank you very much for being with us.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Good. Well, that was a really interesting conversation with some experts about the Santa Marta conference, which took place just over a month ago in Colombia, where we, as We Don't Have Time, were the official global broadcaster. And everyone's got to help in their own capacities. How can we actually ensure that the Santa Marta process to exit fossil fuels by nations actually moves forward? Obviously, we need more countries. There's lots of other things. But we also need to keep track of this. And this is a little clue to where we're going right now. So let me first introduce our new guest. We've got Annika Billing, Secretary General of the We Don't Have Time Foundation. Is that correct?
Right, that is correct.
Okay. And the We Don't Have Time Foundation is really a fascinating institution. First, tell us a little bit about what's your role there and what the foundation is, and then we'll move to this connection with Santa Marta.
Sounds good. So the foundation, it's actually how it works is the foundation is actually the majority shareholder of We Don't Have Time Corporation. So the foundation, which I'm now the Secretary General, and will build this foundation. And the idea is that since We Don't Have Time is the world's largest media platform for climate action, and we produce fantastic content, and we have our broadcasts, and we have great cooperations with companies. So by growing the foundations, there are so many more initiatives that we could create together. And one I will tell you later about, because that's one we will release this week as a concept.
So if you have a foundation, you can sort of work with other foundations, can't you? So foundations often give money for things they want to see happen. For example, we're talking in the climate space here, and they can sometimes do that more easily if they work through another foundation, for example. So foundations are important in their own right, but they're also part of an ecosystem of foundations around the world that sometimes collaborate on projects.
Absolutely, and as foundation, you can collaborate in many ways. You can be a co-partners in funding, but you can also be co-partners in implementing, or you could be implementer, partner, funder, and there's so many interesting ways of working together. And also a lot of companies have their foundations. So you have slightly different roles. But the roles of the foundations are, regardless on where they are, to make a change in an area. And our focus area is, as you know, to focus on transitioning away from fossil fuels. So we will also now be able to create our own initiatives and projects and programs together with other foundations or NGOs or other stakeholders, and also apply for funding for that and have campaigns and advocacy campaigns. So I think this is a really good combination. And of course, we have endless opportunities with the enormous reach and the quality of content that we don't have time have. So it's like a perfect combination in my world. And also I think it's a new one, because I think the NGO world also needs to change, and also change as the world is changing, as the partnerships are changing. So I believe this is a really exciting like co-partnership within the same group.
And just curiously and briefly, I mean, what attracted you to becoming the Secretary General of the We Don't Have Time Foundation? Is it passionate environmentalism, or is it curiosity?
It's passionate about development in general. But I've been working a lot with children and youth and healthcare strengthening and access to healthcare and safe surgery. But the way the world is now, it's like climate is like the umbrella. You have all these sustainable development goals, all these silos. But if you look at the climate and the climate change and the challenges we face, that umbrella encompasses all of those SDGs below, so to speak. So I think we can't do any of the SDGs. They cannot be fulfilled if we fix the climate change and have a healthy planet.
Yes, so we need to fix what's happening with the climate and get back to something that's more stable and the healthy planet, and that gives us a chance to meet all the other sustainability goals that we have set for ourselves as an international community. Yeah.
And also lots of expert organizations might have been focused, let's say, children's rights. Now it's children's rights and climate change, women's rights and climate change, because it's always the most vulnerable populations that are affected the most, as we know.
So we talked briefly about Santa Marta at the beginning, and this is a new way in which governments are thinking about how to collaborate together to exit fossil fuels. I think for a lot of people that haven't been watching climate change over the years, they find it hard to believe that somehow the elephant in the room of how to get off fossil fuels was kind of parked somewhere else outside the conference halls of the big UN climate processes. And it was all about setting targets, and which is in themselves important. And it was also about different sectors of the economy, like forests, or maybe this area with industry, but not really focusing on the elephant in the room, which is how to get off fossil fuels. So, in terms of supporting the Santa Marta initiative and moving forward, what has the foundation created and will be unveiled this week in London during London Climate Action Week?
Well, we have created this really interesting initiative, where at the heart of this initiative is a tracker. And this tracker will track the progress of the nation's positions on transitioning away from fossil fuels. So basically, we will have 3 tiers. It's green, yellow, and red. And if you're green, you have a plan. You're a part of the Santa Marta as participants, and you have a credible roadmap for phase out. And then you have yellow, on your way, not quite there, but you have writings in your policies and you're working on a roadmap. and they have red. Non-commitment whatsoever, or actually blocking or working against this progress.
Right. So it's simple, it's straightforward, it's to the point.
Yes.
And perhaps sometime, maybe shortly, or maybe it's even included, we'll also be looking, I suppose, at what are businesses doing and maybe what are cities doing, so other supportive sectors of the economy. Yeah.
Absolutely. So we will start with the nations and build from there. And you'll be able to look at a map and different countries. And if you press one of the maps, you will get more information. So different subsections within different areas. And of course, it's a concept, but it's very well worked through. And we will talk much more about it when we'll have an official launch on Friday.
Yes, we're broadcasting on Friday.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Okay, very interesting indeed. And that's our contribution, working through the We Don't Have Time Foundation and then broadcasting on We Don't Have Time to publicize to our millions of viewers. This is our contribution to moving the Santa Marta initiative forward and hopefully getting more countries and nations and businesses and cities on board to exit fossil fuels. That's absolutely super. Well, look, very nice to meet you here on We Don't Have Time.
Welcome to a live recording of the Understory podcast, a collaboration between Terraformation and We Don't Have Time as part of our London Climate Action Week broadcast. I'm here in studio alongside my podcast co-host, Jad Daly. We're back together again. Sometimes we're live, sometimes we're not. We like to keep the audience guessing. Jad is the president of Terraformation. So, as you know, you've been tuning into our podcast from all over the world. London Climate Action Week brings together tens of thousands of people to talk about what to do about the climate crisis. Most of them are not young. Most of them do not live in communities that are most immediately threatened. And most of the conversations happening this week are being conducted in English by people with access to infrastructure that the majority of the world's climate-affected population does not have. This episode sits inside of that irony, and it examines it directly. So our two guests joining us today, representing some of these underrepresented communities around the world and the youth as well, are Samra Khan. She works for an organization that exists because 90% of climate science is published in English, and yet 80% of the world doesn't speak it. We also have with us Zainab B. She works on advancing unconditional cash transfers as tools for climate justice, conservation, and community resilience. Both of you, welcome, firstly. Thank you for joining us in studio during Climate Week. Both of you have built things in response to a crisis that you didn't choose. This is not your generation's doing. We're very aware of that. And the governance structure has not been built in how to address these issues with the next generation in mind, despite what we've told ourselves and despite what we've told audiences. So these are important critical issues to dissect and discuss. So over to Jad to get into what we're going to be talking about today.
Yeah, thanks, Shetta. This is an episode that is one that feels really personal for me. I've had an incredible opportunity to be mentored by youth in this movement, to be inspired by youth in this movement, really from the very beginnings of my work on forests and climate change. And, you know, the understory is about getting to the stories that are undertold in our movement. And so passing the mic to youth leaders here in the midst of this event, which, as you said, Shatta, predominantly gives the mic to folks who are more established in their careers from large organizations, feels really important. Absolutely. And kind of a perfect expression of what this podcast is all about. I've just been blown away by the kinds of organizations that youth have built. And so we're really excited as one part of this to hear about the work that you're doing and how your organizations are out there creating more accessibility for youth and other people across the world to climate action. But we also want to get at some other dimensions of this as well. One is just understanding the unique challenges that youth organizations are facing writ large to access, in venues like this one and in governmental decision making. You've obviously been very successful in creating some of that access, but we'd like to hear what's that journey been about and what more do we need to do to create a truly accessible and equitable movement that empowers youth organizations in every possible way, providing platform, providing financial resources and other things to feed your success. So tell us how you built it, but also help us really understand what we need to do as a movement to continue to feed and empower the incredible leadership that youth are providing. And then lastly, there's one dimension of this that at Terraformation we're particularly interested in, which is youth attitudes and engagement on nature-based solutions. Youth have had, I think, really strong opinions both directions. Some of the hardest critiques of nature-based solutions and carbon markets, for example, have come from youth actors who are not quite sure if these are legitimate parts of the equation.
Resisting our establishment.
That's right. And yet at the same time, we've had incredible leadership from youth as well in empowering nature-based solutions. And so youth almost feel like a bit of a swing vote on nature-based solutions. And so really interested to get into today, what's your current thinking? What are you hearing from other youth in the movement about nature-based solutions? And what can we do to empower youth within the nature-based side of this movement, similar to the other kinds of broader questions we'll talk about in terms of empowering youth leadership in the climate movement writ large?
Awesome. Okay, let's get going. I know you're eager to share your expertise with our audience. So I'm going to start with you, Zainab. Tell us about your work with Equal Right and why unconditional cash transfers are the key tool for climate justice. Let's get into the nature of your organization.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And thank you for having me in the podcast. So I'll tell you a bit about my story. I started in the climate justice space 5 years back. And one of this organization, I did this fellowship called Be Visionaries Mercedes-Benz Fellowship. And I started to receive monthly basic income when I was a student. And that literally changed my mind. And I was always an economic student, wanted to understand what I as an economic student could actually do in the climate justice space. And I got to know about economic systems change, justice angle. And that is when I actually got the chance to dive deeper into the role of cash transfers and basic income. So what we are currently doing at Equal Right, our major and most important goal is to advance the role of unconditional cash transfers and basic income to advance climate justice, human rights, and equity. So we basically tried to dive deeper into who are the most vulnerable communities in the world. And it's always the Pacific that is always left behind, and not like, if you look at London Climate Week as well, not many Pacific voices are present here, especially young voices from the Pacific are not present here. And we try to dive deeper into the problems they're facing and what can we do best to support them. And the best way to intervene was financial support. And this is wherein our project, Unconditional Cash for Climate Justice in Tuvalu, was born. So what started as initial conversations with few Tuvaluans actually turned into a cash transfers model wherein we are giving monthly cash transfers as well as lump sum to young climate defenders in Tuvalu. And we cover a range of young people. There are droughtsmen in the space whom we are supporting. There are like people who are doing ocean conservation, and they had other jobs as well. But this kind of monthly cash transfers is actually helping them to focus more on their climate activism work, climate advocacy work. We've been able to bring in advocates and activists from the Pacific region and across the global south here in the COP and decision-making spaces as well. So working on cash transfers for a while, we realized that people know what is best for them. It's very important, and it's time that we actually give them the ownership to decide what's the best way to support them. And cash transfers is one way to give back that ownership, that sense of dignity, and that sense of shared powerness among people, among communities. And now that we have been able to establish such kind of a pilot, we are not ending here. This is actually the beginning. And now we are looking at something called South Pacific Climate Justice Fund. And the idea is to look at something like a sovereign wealth style climate justice fund model, and how can we use the existing climate finance that is present here that never reaches the grassroots, that never reaches the local communities. How do we make that climate finance more localized? So what we are trying to do is trying to look at a South Pacific Climate Justice Fund model wherein we are able to give unconditional monthly cash transfers to each and every citizen in the Pacific, not just as climate finance, but also as a compensation for them for all the loss that they have been bearing all this while. Yeah.
Wow, Zeynep, that was so exciting. And I have to say, there are a couple things that really ring for me out of the kind of leadership that youth are providing. First, that moral clarity in what you just described. You know, failure is not an option in terms of getting these resources equitably to all people. And I just love the moral clarity behind what you just described, but also the willingness to think outside the box for different kinds of solutions. And Samrat, you know, your founder, Sophie Kiani, has been, again, one of these friends and mentors for me in the climate movement. In fact, she and I wrote a piece together in Time after a one COP about the injustice of the way that youth were positioned within that or not positioned within that COP in some cases. So just such respect for your organization and its roots, and similarly thinking about the moral clarity of getting climate information equitably to all people. So you talked about overcoming financial barriers in an equitable way. Well, what about language barriers and overcoming those in an equitable way? And Climate Cardinals has been so incredibly inventive in understanding that language barrier to climate information and then overcoming it. I'd love if you could tell everyone about the work of the organization and how you're making that happen.
Yeah, of course. Climate Cardinals, we've been around for over 5 years now, celebrating our 5th anniversary. And our goal is really to reduce language barriers in the climate movement so every community can take action and protect their future. Translated over 4 million words, over 105 languages. Started
Incredible.
as a group of high school students in a $500 Google Doc. And now one of the world's largest youth-led climate education nonprofits.
Incredible.
And so we have, just this year, we're celebrating so much this June. Our theme among our leadership team is legacy. And we've been building from, doubling our chapters this year to completing our first cohort of our fellowship program to celebrating exciting new partnerships. And but really just learning as much as we can about how can we make sure we lead our young people who themselves are destined to be amazing future climate leaders. It's moving away from giving them, you can't, you can't give a person a fish, like giving a person a fish versus teaching them how to fish.
Right.
That's what will make the biggest difference in their life and that'll be most transformative. And that's why I was so interested in what you were saying about your work, because the community you're supporting, the work you're doing for them is going to be so transformational. At the time, I think in social impact or in, long-term established legacy climate organizations, they've been doing their work for so long at such a high level, it's pretty easy to forget the simple things like in our organization, if a young, student from Bangladesh who, hasn't really had too much exposure to English, although they're very keen to learn it, wants to apply for a $350 micro grant, they might get an application that has insanely challenging language, and they have to give a line item budget for every single thing they're applying for. How are they supposed to navigate that in an environment where they haven't gotten the resources they need to even kick off? And so actually just led like a fundraising training for our chapter leads a week ago. And it was all about how do you begin even fundraising in social impact. So you asked earlier about what are the biggest challenges for youth and inclusion? It's like accessibility and education. I can imagine you have similar experience as a fellow South Asian, as well as for many other reasons. You have to learn the whole process of the fundraising of the world, of the social impact world, and the legal and financial compliance. And these are all really great leadership skills that young people want to learn. And we figure out, how can we create, these resources and these learning opportunities for our members, but creating it in a way where we're not replicating the work of other organizations. In fact, taking what they're doing really, really well, learning best practices from the most excellent models, and then teaching them how to implement it themselves. And also it's a train the trainer model. Everything we do, the goal is so that they can also teach it to others, because that's really what compounds our effect over time.
Yeah. Can I ask you a quick follow-up question? Because it's just triggered by both of you, which is the role of technology, right? We're all thinking so much about technology as a potential, the threats and risks and unintended consequences, but also the power of technology to democratize access to information, access to language, overcoming language barriers, and access to information, access to financial opportunities. I'm just curious for the two of you, how are you thinking about and how are you finding successes potentially with using technology, for good to unlock some of the things that you're trying to do?
I can go first. I think it's not just about translation, it's also about interpretation.
Yeah.
And being like, I studied majority of my a high school in English. So I find it difficult to translate even the term like climate change in Hindi. So it was like, especially when we talk about these terms, it's not that used often. So I think technology did play a very important role in interpreting as well as bringing in the cultural context and like making it more appropriate for communities. And India with so many languages, it does help, especially like all these AI softwares.
Yeah.
For example, if before I would say AI, it was a bit difficult because it was like word to word translation and it often didn't, I would say, interpret the right thing. But with AI, we have been able to actually double up our work, and I've like seen people translating whole grant applications and being able to write all their stories, theory of change in different languages, and it's always so much fun. And there have been like glossaries of UNFCCC difficult terminologies and difficult terms translated. But also not just word-to-word translation, but how would you interpret in your language, in your context, is something AI is helping with.
Super interesting. How about for you all?
Yeah, we actually just had a breakfast roundtable this morning here at London Climate Action Week in partnership with Purpose Social Impact. And it was a full house and it was an amazing discussion. We, really were discussing, what is holding organizations back from implementing and embedding language justice as, a delivery imperative into their work, across their workflows, budgeting it into their work, showcasing to their decision makers as well why it's such a worthy and necessary investment. And because initially it can be very intensive work. Translations are very intensive. Technology has been a great help. For example, we've partnered with Google's AI Translation Hub, and they're one of our greatest supporters, Google.org, and with all of the, on top of technology, we also make sure that all of our translations are human verified. They have to be human verified because that's how you capture the cultural context. Especially, I wonder what city are you from in India? Delhi? Okay, yeah. So you're like Hindi speaking as well. I grew up on Shah Rukh Khan movies, so I know what you mean. Like I'm Pakistani and we speak Urdu. And so like our words, like they are, most of our language, like it wasn't built for a post-industrial revolution society. So the words like verified or, Microsoft or something like that word that's not a term that would apply, but any word, so many words you can think of, like we don't have time. Like those words, or terraformation. Like those concepts, they would translate very different in the Hindi or Urdu. And so, yeah.
This is true for Bengali too. You're really speaking to me. I feel seen. Me trying to speak Bengali, and I tried to do a media interview when I was in Calcutta visiting my family once, and they wanted it to be in Bengali, and it was such a struggle. And it was my first language, technically. So why do we just assume every other native language speaker, whatever is native for them, should just be able to translate and speak to English? Yeah. So it's just,
especially 21st century corporate jargon was all developed from an Anglo perspective, right? Or primarily Anglophone, Francophone perspective. So we're trying to address that. And
what has helped me actually is how would I actually help my maternal grandmother understand all these things and all these concepts. She's 86-year-old and like she's super involved in all the work that I'm doing, but like still unaware of like various concepts. So it's always interesting to know. And for me as well, it's an exercise to go a bit down, grounded, and see what it's like to explain it to her in the simplest of language.
And this is what Sophia used to say. It still says the whole reason behind Climate Cardinals was her native language is Farsi. And so similarly, she experienced what we're talking about here. And she wanted to be able to translate these science concepts, climate science concepts, to her family members. So it really is personal. That's where it all starts. And all of this is personal because we are engaging in some impact of climate every single day. Just today, in the middle of the week during London Climate Week, London Climate Action Week, it's so hot. This is breaking records here in Europe, and these are really impacting us and the people we care about in real time. And so this work is so critical, and thousands of people are here, right? We are part of this community, but I'm curious from both of your perspectives, who's missing and what's missing? As you said, Carmen Cardinals is now celebrating 5 years. Can we assume the work is done? Or there must be a long way to go. So what's missing still?
What's missing? I think that, the people on the front lines are very aware of the solutions and the issues facing their communities. And the communities that are usually here are honestly, sometimes they're so deep in like their workplaces trying to address these issues. And even though they're doing amazing work building partnerships, figuring out what works best for operational delivery, they're so deep in, they're not necessarily experiencing the very issues on a day-to-day basis that the individuals are trying to solve. And, co-creating with them, that's something that we're really focused on in our organizations now. I'm sure yours is as well. Intergenerational leadership, applying intergenerational equity, intergenerational governance, so really co-creating with young people is very important for us. Our executive director is on the board of Veolia, one of the world's largest environmental companies. And it's it's a very exciting. We also partner with Coachtopia, right, which was a sub-brand of Coach, and they've been a great support of ours for our fellowship program for the Coachtopia Catalyst Fund, and they're also they completely co-create their products with young people and reuse their sustainable leather. It's all their products are made with their donated or reused sustainable leather goods, and so across sectors and across industries, you're seeing these very, very cool, unique goals this desire to co-create with young people. But the young people, as they get pulled into this world and working into this world, it's easy to get disconnected but because you have to put in so much time and energy, and there's a lot of learning that goes into it. But basically you start learning how to function from like the establishment's point of view. You're like, oh, how are you, how are your pitch decks and your slide decks showcasing to your potential funder, how this, why this would be valuable, but then you're using technical jargon to explain this process. And then you're like, oh, well, why don't we just, it's hard. It's actually a whole process to get feedback from your community members, know what their needs are, and then get those, that whole process of getting the resources back to them. It can be very intensive. And I would say I wouldn't blame the individuals that are trying to address issues in these organizations like yours. It's more a commentary on the system as a whole. Sure. The system unironically slows down our ability to deliver things to people that need them yesterday.
Yes, because we don't have time.
Yeah.
Good.
I'll be honest here, Shweta. I personally feel we need to focus more on decentralization of power. Even though young people are present in this space, who is actually being represented? And that is an important question to ask ourselves. I think who's missing? It's the people whose story we are telling while sitting here. The person who is actually suffering, they never made. Yep. They never make it to these conferences, these spaces. Yes. And I think it's time that we actually be honest about this. Who's getting that position of power? Yeah. It's really less people. I could actually count them on my hands. Yeah. So when we actually talk about what's missing and who's missing, it's definitely we need to think about decentralization of power. We need to think about
localizing where the communities are,
and actual implementation of intergenerational leadership. Something like Youth Climate Collaborative is working on with intergenerationals. How do we bring in how do we bring in actual people and actual power to the people? And how do we actually put people in a less tokenized way within organizations, within decision-making spaces? And there are two ways to do it. One would be policy. How do we integrate young people in the policy space so that they just don't have like a seat at the table, but also a say at the table.
Yeah.
But also, how are they being able to integrate within the agenda setting? So a lot of time, young people are always invited as
Right.
victims in this space. As like, okay, you witnessed this flood, what were your thoughts? But young people are never invited most of the time as experts in the space. Why? What is wrong with this space? Why are young people always victimized? And so this is something that we really need to think about,
Yeah.
and we need to integrate more young people in the agenda setting space, as in not just this is what we are discussing, what are your thoughts, but
Yeah.
what should we discuss? We should be the ones to decide that.
Yeah.
Secondly, in the youth needs to be more present in the philanthropy space. So this is something that I'm working on with ImpactShip. So we are a community of 2,000 young people from Global South. And the idea is for more decentralization of power, more access to climate finance, funding for Global South, young change makers, grassroots funding, but also how do we bring in climate justice, not just something that philanthropies fund, but as a principle.
Yeah.
How do we bring in justice within the operational level of philanthropies, and how do we bring in the concept of shared governance? And I think young people, 60% of like India's population and 1.2 billion people, they need to be one of the, I would say, easiest way to bring in diversity within philanthropies, within decision-making space. So I think we definitely have loads to miss on.
Yeah, and so actually I want to tug on that thread. Make sure we get to the nature piece of this, 'cause I'm so interested to get your perspectives on that. But before we shift gears, I'd actually want to tug on this thread that you're both just talking about. Sophia, the founder of Climate Cardinals, and I've had this conversation, Jerome Foster, Kevin Patel, some of our great friends, people you of course know leaders in the youth movement, about the question of risk. And risk has been a through line through this whole conversation here. And places, for example, that finance feels is too risky to invest, and the whole question of, are we willing to go where we're needed most or only where it's safe? And it feels like the youth movement is kind of representative of that. You know, investing in youth organizations is seen as risky in philanthropy, and inviting youth into the room in political context is seen as risky because youth speak truth to power. Youth are going to give it to you straight when they get that seat at the table. So there's an interesting question here about our risk tolerance in this movement and being willing to really open ourselves up to the full power of youth, as you said, at the table, and as you've talked about having the full place and resources for youth leadership to fully flourish. So I'm curious if you all have ever experienced a place where you felt like you were kind of treated as too much of a risk, or you've seen that as a barrier, and what could we do to almost de-risk this or help people get over that barrier of really bringing youth into all the places that they need to be?
Yeah, definitely.
I was going to say, what's it called? The Youth Climate Justice Fund, you know about them, right? Have did that study, and they found that only like 0.76% of climate funding goes to youth-led organizations. But half the world's population is under 30, and all of our emerging economies are going to have young generations that are rising. Are they going into a world where they're like the lives their ancestors lived versus the lives they get to live have met the standards that the first world has, like first world countries have reached? We have so much abundance in our world and so much prosperity, but the distribution is so unequal. So but the youth funding, definitely.
I would say we need to hold them more accountable. Just like a metric with diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think we need to not let them go of the accountability element. And young people are the best ways to keep them accountable. And I think we need to do loads on that end. I would say we need loads of resources as young people to be able to do something like that. Lots of effort needs to go into advocacy, lobbying, and actually bringing in young people and integrating it in the governance system. And one example was something that I was part of was Ørsted Youth Panel. So I think 2 years back, Ørsted, one of the Europe's leading wind energy company, their former CEO, Matt Snipper, he basically set up a 7-people youth advisory council.
Fantastic.
And it was so much fun to actually be able to directly talk to someone at the top.
Yeah.
Listen from his perspective, okay, what's the reality, what's realistic, but also raise his ambition, bring in fresh perspective.
Yeah.
And we were able to like literally push him to be more ambitious. And that is what matters, to actually be integrated in the governance system.
Yep.
And slightly lobby and slightly hold people accountable, but definitely it's going to take years, and this is why we are here.
Isn't it interesting that I keep seeing this recurring theme from older generations, that they say that younger people are giving them a lot of courage. And that's been so fascinating to think. And I wonder what has inspired that in young people. I think about that a lot. What has inspired our generation to be so uniquely, what adults say is more courageous than their generation?
I think it's sometimes our optimism. I would say it's definitely something, I think we don't have a choice instead of being optimistic.
Yeah.
Combination.
Yeah, a combination
right?
of being...
Those two things.
Yeah. I think young people think more from like the optimistic and like being ambitious lens rather than being realistic, because we don't have experience, we don't know what's not possible. So why don't we go all in? And I think this is what I love about Gen Z.
Yeah.
We don't limit ourselves, and that's why we have this sense of like, oh, I can go to the moon tomorrow. We have that sense of optimism, and that is visible in our actions when we speak. And it's always...
And you see it in the people younger than us now. Yes. We see it in Gen Alpha.
You'll always see it in the next
And people say they're annoying too much on social media. What I notice is that they're using social media as like case studies to learn. They absorb so much so quickly. Yeah. And then they have like compounded levels of knowledge and competence that even our generation as Gen Z will have.
Yeah. And we'll see. Get into nature.
Yeah, and so we'll shift to nature, but I want to say one last thing. One of our goals with this podcast is not to come and have polite conversations where I'll acknowledge problems, we don't come up with solutions. Thank you for naming a solution about hold ourselves accountable. Let's put a number to it. What is an equitable and appropriate proportion of climate philanthropy that should be going to youth? We should come up with a number for that, because we know it's not 0.76%, which that study found, which I read the same study. It's clearly a bigger number than that. And if we're having trouble getting over risk, well, we see finance, for example, saying we're going to get over risk and create like a fund for those places that are considered too risky and just go there no matter what. So what's the question for philanthropy, for governments and others? What's a kind of a minimum viable investment in youth? And we try to put that number there now, but I think it'd be an interesting question to challenge ourselves and to say that we're going to hold ourselves to some level and then really challenge philanthropies, for example, to work towards that, governments to work towards that kind of level of youth investment as a way to make sure that we get over this kind of fear of questions about youth's ability to deliver. Youth have proven they can deliver and really make that investment real. So I think that's an interesting thing for all of us to follow up on. But let's shift to the nature side of it. And so as I said in the setup, in my experience as somebody who's been working on forest and climate change for over 20 years now, again, youth have been some of the greatest leaders in it, but also some of the most vocal in raising concerns because of youth seriousness about really getting climate right. Can we really trust these nature-based solutions? Do they really work? And is the financing that's being used to advance them credible and those kinds of things? So I'd love to hear your current state, both your takes on where the kind of current state of youth perspective is on nature-based solutions as part of the totality of our climate solutions, and where do you think youth want to step in more and should be empowered to lead in this area?
I would love to share. So I actually, before I was chief of staff or a C-suite executive with Climate Cardinals or anything like that, I was a conservation specialist. And after college, right out of college, I actually did the Climate Impact Corps program.
Wow. Cool.
In the United States, and I led what's known as the 100 Trees Initiative at an amazing nonprofit called the Creative Enterprise Zone, and it was really my role as an AmeriCorps member to ensure that on public boulevards in a district in St. Paul, Minnesota, where I live in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. That each year we plant 100 trees in the neighborhood, which has been historically underfunded and is a victim of redlining. And so, that I I'm so proud to say that we did plant those 100 trees.
You're working for tree equity, as we would call that. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, on the last day of our tree planting day, we actually had a bunch of all of our volunteers went home, and then we were like, "Oh no, we're gonna have like 5 to 10 trees that aren't planted." And then this van showed up to our to the location and was like, "Hi, is this St. Paul like summer festival happening today?" And I looked on the calendar, and that was next month. And I was like, "Oh, you guys have come on the wrong day. You're a month early." But then I was like, "Wait, they've come right here, right now." And they were like these big group of, bulky men. And I was like, "Hey, instead of, the festival, would you like to plant some trees today?" And they were like, and then at first I only saw like 1 or 2 people at the front, and they were like, "Oh yeah, that sounds awesome." They opened the van, and there's like 5, 6 huge bulky lumberjack men right there. And the guy in the back goes, "Oh yeah, my father was an arborist. I'm built for this. Let's go." And that day, just from those people showing up and me asking them, I was so scared. I thought it would be so inappropriate to ask them. I was just like, "Do you want to help us plant these trees?" All of our trees got planted.
Another
Here we
example,
are.
youth are fearless, and that nature-based solutions have many access points, right? That's one of the great things about them. They can work it from individual to organizational scales. There's so many access points for
Yes, it was a
youth to lead
completely
in this area.
grassroots-funded project.
Yeah, totally.
And it's so amazing that programs like AmeriCorps and Climate Impact Corps, create the capacity for young people to, take the initiative to build these projects on their own. It also teaches you a lot about project management.
Yeah.
And afterwards, I became a full-time conservation specialist. And so, as a result of, but unfortunately what happened is when the Trump administration came in, after my year in the AmeriCorps program, they canceled they ceased all operations for future programming. So all of those like thousands of jobs, specifically addressing nature-based solutions, conservation, right? And I think I wanted to mention that because nature-based solutions is so tied up around like our economy and economic opportunity. Yeah. So many of our problems are also potential, jobs that can be solved and are our future solutions. And I had this experience before. I was involved with Climate Cardinals as director of partnerships, but I loved my conservation work so much. And and it was really tragic to see that the funding restraints were killing these very, very needed programs at a time when they were needed more than ever. Yeah. So
maybe a perfect handoff to you because you're working on economic prosperity and equity and justice in that regard. And this is an engine for economic progress and opportunity. How is this work playing out in your experience?
So just to give you an example from Tuvalu, and we were looking for young people who are quite active in this space. And while taking their interviews, we got to know that they actually just want to focus on ocean coral restoration and save it on their own. They're not waiting for other experts and people across the globe come and save them. But they needed an economic stability. And that is what cash helped them with. So cash transfers literally gave them some time and some mental space so that they can actually do and save their planet. But apart from Tuvalu, we also have a network called Cash for Conservation Coalition that we are working at Equal Right, which is how can we leverage the use of unconditional cash transfers to look at behavioral nudges, but also motivate and encourage communities to focus on their conservation metrics. For example, in Kenya, we are setting up something called the Climate Commons Fund, wherein we are looking at the problem of overgrazing. So a particular community that we are focused on, we are looking at how we can use something like cash transfers to give communities an understanding about the negative impacts of overgrazing, but also give them some economic stability so that they can transition to other economic opportunities and other livelihood metrics as well. And apart from that, I think it's also kind of trendy as well. My best friend gifted me a tree and it got planted somewhere in South India, and that was literally the best gift I've ever received. So I think young people have actually integrated that within our trends, within our cultures to actually think about nature and take it seriously.
Well, this is why we're inspired by the next generation, as you will be. This is how we pass the baton, and this is how we solve the world's most pressing global challenges. I can't believe we're already coming up to the end. And I hate to be the bearer of cutting the conversation short, that's the worst part of moderating. But let's get a few more questions in before we end this panel. And let's talk about what you're working on and what you're hoping to accomplish in the coming months. So let me start with you, Samra. Climate Cardinal is in a phase of rapid expansion. It's a really exciting time. I'm a proud supporter. So what do you need the most to press forward with all of the different projects that you have on your agenda?
I think that we have such incredible young talent that work from, volunteer level, just learning with us, volunteering 1 to 5 hours a week, incredibly dedicated, thousands of volunteers, and a very amazing executive team so we have a volunteer executive team of 70 people. We have a design team. We have a chapters program team, and whatever we can do to support these young people in, developing their skill set, supporting their growth. I think a lot of us have learned it's not enough to give somebody, resources. It's really about training them in a way that's transformative for their life, right? So supporting young people in building those key skill sets that are really going to protect us and, build that future.
Same to you, Zainab.
I would say I'll focus on shared governance and ownership. I think it's high time now that we think about the role of young people, especially from Global South, in shared governance, in ownership, especially where the money is moving. We do have a lot to say, we can decide, and it's high time that we actually transfer that ownership, either in the form of getting us involved within philanthropy systems. And these are not just principles, like we have been able to set up several advisory boards, we've been able to integrate young people in the governance system. So we have been able to do it, we have the case studies, we have people actually making that kind of an impact. Now it's time that you actually come to us and tell us that you're interested and we're gonna take it forward, I would say. And lastly, I think on restriction, I would say people, to all the philanthropies here, I think people know what is best for them. And cash transfers is the best way to give back people the right to decide what is best for them. And I think situations and context are so different that a lot of time, those who are the most experienced are still not able to understand what's best for a particular community. It is the member of those community that knows what is best for them, that knows what is their culture and context is. Thank you.
Underline. We couldn't support that more. So we still have a few minutes, Jed, if you want to ask any final question or take it away, bring us home.
Absolutely. Well, I want to celebrate the two of you and your organizations, but as representatives of the whole youth climate movement. And as I started out this episode by saying, I have felt inspired, mentored, and at times challenged by that, again, the moral clarity of youth leadership, the relentlessness of youth to challenge conventional thinking and say, failure is not an option. I often say that's one of the things I feel like I learned from youth leaders is failure is not an option. So therefore, if we don't have a solution, we better get busy coming up with one. And you've given us great examples of inventing things, inventing solutions to really profound challenges in our movement. How do we actively get finance to people to move through climate change successfully? How do we overcome language barriers for people around the world? I think sometimes youth are so good at this that those of us forget how hard it is for youth to go from $500 and a Google document to a global organization. From hey, I wonder if we tried this direct payments program to actually bringing something like that to life. It's so much harder than I think we see the end product, but forget how hard it was to build that. So I think the two things I hope that people take away from this episode is for all of us to challenge ourselves to say, just as you both spoken to, how do we institutionalize, in a good way, the role of youth, the resources for youth, the structural supports for youth? Because if this is what youth can do without support, overcoming all these barriers, imagine what youth leaders can do if they had the same kind of resources that other types of organizations have. I think the sky is the limit, and so it's just time for us to not take failure as an option on empowering youth. We need to do the kinds of things you talked about in terms of set a standard, and the kinds of examples that you've given, of the ways in which you all were have slowly but surely gotten the access and the supports that you've needed to grow Climate Cardinals, partnerships like the ones you've mentioned with amazing corporate leaders that have embraced youth, that have been innovators. So I think we really need to, as a movement, identify those success stories and then institutionalize them in a way that makes that the new normal of empowering youth leadership. And lastly, I'm going to make the case, you both made it, but I'll just reinforce it. I have a personal belief that nature-based solutions are uniquely accessible to youth. They're uniquely powerful as pathways for empowering youth leadership, especially in the global south and in other parts of the world where access to some of the kinds of opportunity, organizational, institutional opportunities might not be as immediately present, but these nature-based opportunities are right in people's home communities. And so I really hope that as part of this, we really think very carefully about the nature-based aspect of this and just making youth the front lines of the nature-based movement going forward. So thank you both so much for what you're doing and for joining us today. This has been an incredibly exciting and inspiring episode.
Thank you so much for hosting us.
Thank you both. Appreciate you being here, and please continue to champion the youth advocacy movement this entire week and beyond.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Hello and welcome to the We Don't Have Time's broadcast at London Climate Action Week. We are so thrilled to have in studio with us today the CEO of the National Audubon Society, Elizabeth Gray. Elizabeth, welcome.
Thank you. It's terrific to be here with you.
And so, I've interviewed you. I've had the pleasure of interviewing you a few times as part of the Scientista podcast. And generally, you have already been part of the We Don't Have Time London Climate Action Week broadcast. So some of our audience might already know this. But for those who are tuning in and maybe being introduced to you for the first time and to National Audubon Society, what's so cool about this, what always gets me hyped, is that you were the first woman to lead Audubon in its 120-year history. And I mean, how brilliant, right? We'll talk about change of leadership for a legacy organization like this. How has that changed the way you think about leadership and mentorship and making space for the next generation of conservation leaders and particularly women leaders?
Well, it's such an honor and such a privilege to lead National Audubon Society, and it's a huge responsibility too. I mean, one of the things about breaking a glass ceiling is you're breaking it for the folks that will follow you, right? So, it's a great question. I mean, mentorship has been part of the reason why I am where I am. And it was interesting as I moved through my career, I've had a lot of incredible mentors. When I was reflecting about this, because I get asked this question a lot, one of the things I realized is I'm a huge animal lover. I loved animals as a kid, and the only career that I knew when I was a kid that I had been exposed to was a veterinarian. I had lots of animals growing up. We would go to the vet, but that's really all I knew. And so I went to college, and I just took this elective course with the late and great E.O. Wilson. And he exposed me to the natural world, to studying ecology. And I realized, wow, you can actually have a career as an environmentalist, as a conservationist, as someone who studies animal behavior. And so it's through mentors like that. What he did is he really opened my mind to what was possible. He kind of showed me you can have different careers. And I think that's what mentors do. And while they help grow future leaders, they basically help them understand maybe something that they didn't think was possible is possible, help them reimagine a different future for themselves and provide different perspective. And that's really what the mentors in my life have done for me. And I hope to do for the people who follow in my footsteps.
Handing on the baton, right? To the next generation.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
And it's such a critical approach because not everybody has exposure. And so that's why mentorship really fills those gaps. And it can supplement exposure. So individuals can enter conservation in many different ways, right? Someone might grow up bird watching with their grandparents and they connect in that really personal way. And maybe their first encounter with birds is completely not related to family or friends, or maybe it's TikTok, maybe it's some sort of social media. So how do you build a movement? How do you think about how mentorship relates to that versus a personal experience versus modern technology, and build a movement that is coherent enough to accommodate all of those different exposures to conservation, but loose enough as well to be able to accommodate?
Well, when I started at Audubon, one of the things I was most committed to is building a multicultural, multi-generational movement of conservationists. And it's really tricky, but in order to do that, you have to have all these different entryways. And so the bottom line is I think you want to organize people around a shared purpose, but you want to have different doors for entry. So I want to give a plug for our Instagram and our TikTok pages. That brings in a lot of younger folks into Audubon and our mission, and exposes them to what we're doing and the importance of conservation, climate, biodiversity loss, and the actions you can take, but also going out bird watching. So there are so many different ways. And to me, the more entry points you can have into an organization like Audubon, the better. I mean, frankly, we know we're going to be stronger if we have different perspectives, different generational perspectives, different cultural perspectives. That's how the conservation movement is going to stay relevant moving into the future. And so, again, if you have that shared purpose, and at Audubon, the shared purpose is a place where birds thrive so that people can thrive too. And that's a way for doing conserving birds, conservation through the power of birds, so that you then have a better planet for all living things.
I mean, what a great approach and narrative, right? And we've talked about this on Scientista, and how we get young people, women particularly, interested in bigger science conversations and STEM conversations, potentially through nature, more specifically through bird watching, right? So that's an entry point. But similarly, we might have those who have no interest in birdwatching, or realizing they have no interest in birdwatching, coming in because they're avid photographers. And so they want to be part of a community that is walking through, let's say, Central Park in New York City to take just beautiful pictures, and then being exposed to this community of birdwatchers, and then finding their entry point that way into nature. So, it goes both directions. It's fantastic. So we talk a lot about now, we've been talking about mentoring the next generation. Where has Audubon actually been changed by the next generation? Since we're talking about both directions here, how have younger people not just, been exposed to the potential of nature and bigger picture climate, but have also influenced your strategy and your priorities?
Yeah, and they do every day. One of the programs I absolutely love at Audubon is our Audubon on Campus chapter program. A lot of people do not know that we have Audubon campus chapters. So we are in the United States, we are in over 100 campuses and universities. These are
just fantastic.
Yeah, it's just amazing. So we have campus chapters in colleges and universities and HBCUs and minority serving institutions. These are chapters that were student initiated, they're student led, and they're student run. So these are places where students are really active and learning about conservation and leading in conservation. I'll give you an example. San Diego Mesa College. So this is a place where the students saw need. They really wanted to provide opportunities for underserved students to be involved in nature and in conservation issues. So they looked around, and they initiated a campus chapter program. They looked around and they said, we really have an increased need to improve climate literacy. And this became really important to them. So they launched a climate ambassador program. So they are basically helping students conduct workshops with environmental leaders, political leaders. They're using gardens on campus so they can teach other students about the importance of nature and biodiversity loss and climate change. And this is incredible. They're basically providing opportunities to build the next generation of conservation leadership right in that chapter. So we have models all across the United States, frankly, and we want to expand this into Canada and across Latin America. So we're doing this all across the Western Hemisphere. But this is a place where students can look around, see what's needed. Some of them go out and bird. Some of them conduct these workshops. Some of them do trainings. It's incredible, and they're changing how we do our work at Audubon.
So it doesn't seem like you need to move young people to act, right? It sounds like they're so into it. But in the situations where you might have to, especially based on some of the stark, unfortunate numbers. I don't even want to show these numbers, but this is the reality of what we're dealing with here. We know from Audubon that since 1970, 2/3 of North American species are potentially facing unlivable conditions by 2080. 3 billion birds have been lost since 1970. So how do we translate some of that science and data to really motivate young people?
This is an issue that I think about every single day. First of all, I'm the mom of two 20-somethings, and I know that they have inherited a lot from our generation and from generations before us. And climate change, kind of the state of the world, is really top of mind for them. And it can be tough and creates a lot of anxiety and things like that. Here's what I would say about this. We have to be honest about the reality that we're facing, for sure. But we also have to provide examples and places where we can see things turn around, where people can take action and they see improvement in the natural environment and in the world. And then finally, you have to give people a role so that they can act themselves and really help move that. So, I'll give you another example. So we have this project called Project Puffin. So back in the 70s, they are the cutest birds. Back in the 70s, the Atlantic puffin had basically disappeared from coastal Maine. And Audubon got really involved, and we basically decided to try to restore Atlantic puffin colonies. So we basically went to habitat that was no longer harboring puffin colonies, and they're colonial nesters. So a sole puffin does not want to arrive on an island and nest all by itself. They want others around it. We use decoys, we use mirrors. We really tried to use different kind of tools to attract breeding puffins back to Maine. And this is basically our first successful restoration project in terms of restoring seabird colonies. And it's thriving now. There are things that you can do. That's just one example. But I love telling people about these examples of where when people take action, things can improve in the natural world. And that's the most important thing people have to remember. It is not hopeless. Things do recover. Sometimes happens more quickly than we expect. And so you've got to have the faith, and organizations like Audubon have to help people understand where they can get involved and make a difference.
Tell people the truth, because we deserve to know the truth. The behavioral scientist in me loves what you just said, right? But ultimately motivate to action by sharing these kinds of hopeful stories that are proven solutions.
Yes, you just have to. That's right.
So we know that birds are not respectful of political borders, as you say very correctly. And there's an enormous expansion of your ambition where you're looking to bring members, chapters, partners, young leaders along in understanding that the migratory patterns of birds that go all around the world, how do we use birds and their migration to help explain conservation at a global scale?
Now, this has been a real evolution for Audubon. So we are an organization that was kind of born and grew up as being a U.S.-based organization. And we have, over the last 5, 6, 7 years, really evolved into a hemispheric organization. We're now operating in 11 countries in the Western Hemisphere. And the reason we did that is because we know that you have to work across the Western Hemisphere in order to protect birds. So this is something that, believe it or not, has been pretty easy to have to get other people to understand, because there are such great local examples. Birds are visible. You can track their pathways. You can look at live maps where you can see birds moving across the Western Hemisphere, across countries as they do their migratory routes. I love this story where I was in Colombia, and I was out with colleagues. We were bird watching before our meetings began, and I saw a Baltimore Oriole. Yeah. Now, that may not mean much to people, but I'm from Maryland, sure. And the Baltimore Oriole is a Maryland state bird. It's been the state bird since 1947. And here I am in Latin America. Yeah. I'm in the country of Colombia, and I'm looking at the Maryland state bird. And that was a moment for me where, and I often say to people, because a lot of times people care, of course, about what's in their own backyard. And I love to say to folks, when you care about this bird or that bird, that brings you joy. Well, guess what? That bird spends 6 months of its life in another country. And so if you want that bird to keep coming back to your backyard, you need to also care not just about what's in the kind of your local vicinity, but also what's happening in other parts of the world. And it helps people understand, kind of open their framework and open their aperture to the importance of thinking about what's happening directly around them, but also what's happening in other parts of the world that affects them as well.
Sure. It's so lovely. It really, these are the kinds of tangible stories that really just, it just puts nature in perspective, makes it part of our every day.
Exactly.
And it's such a critical part of the bigger picture that we're trying to do, which is to save the planet ultimately, keep
That's
it habitable for the birds we share this planet with and for future generations.
Yep.
We've come to the last question. So birds cross all these boundaries, as we know, political boundaries, generational boundaries, cultural, geographic. Have you seen moments where actual shifts in perception have happened, where people can relate to each other thanks to this common element that they care about?
This is one of the things I most love about working at Audubon, is because you see those moments of connection everywhere, and birds really do create them. So last week I was at the Sun Valley Forum.
Yep.
And I was sitting at...
Shout out to Amy Christensen.
Yeah,
we love you.
absolutely. Love you, Amy. Thank you for doing this. And I was sitting at dinner with people I would consider icons of the fashion and the music industry. And at first I'm thinking, I'm not sure how we're going to draw a connection and have a conversation. Within 5 minutes, we had folks showing pictures of the birds in their backyard, the birds that they go out, that are visiting them regularly. People are scrolling through their phones. We're all sharing pictures. We're telling stories of instances where we encountered really cool or beautiful birds that brought us joy or kind of created this magical moment for us. So birds do that. They do that almost anywhere I go. It's amazing. I often tell people where I work and they'll have a bird story, whether they've been at an Audubon camp when they were in elementary school, or they've been in a chapter, or they've gone to an Audubon center. There's all these connection stories. And so what I love to kind of close this piece with is, birds do not cross borders. They do not let borders impede them, and more powerfully, they also open borders to us to build connections with other people as well.
Totally. The ambassador for the planet and
they
for
are
humanity,
the ambassador.
right?
They are the ultimate ambassador for the planet.
Well, since meeting you and learning about Audubon, I will say I have more bird stories now than I ever imagined I could. I am paying attention to birdsong, to birds. I am so tuned in. My Merlin app is constantly going off, and I love it. So I encourage all of you tuning in to please get your binoculars out, or just go outside and just enjoy, experience nature. You will be shocked at the understory of it all.
You will be. It's so peaceful. It's inspirational, and the birds are helping us change the planet one bird at a time.
Thank you to you, and thank you to Audubon for the work that you do.
Thank you so much.
Please keep going and enjoy the rest of London Climate Action Week.
Yes, you too.
So hello and welcome back to London Climate Action Week 2026. Here we are at Sustainable Ventures. Our hosts here at County Hall, which is a beautiful white iconic building on the other side of the river from the House of Commons. So hold that in your head if you're from a country not the UK, one of our viewers from around the world. One of the big topics at this transitioning away from fossil fuel conference that was held in Santa Marta, which we don't have time, was very privileged to be the official global broadcaster, was something called investor-state dispute settlement. And I have to say, having been involved in environmental issues and climate issues at some of the highest levels since the late 1980s, that one had slipped by my agenda 100%. So even I was quite curious and quite fascinated about what these things were. They're known as ISDS, and we're going to talk about this, and we're going to work out why they are a real pain in the backside for anybody trying to actually exit from fossil fuels, and maybe what we can actually do about it. So we have a good lineup of 4 people, 3 here live in the studio, and Helena Norberg Hodge, who is Director of Local Futures, and she's coming in through the magic of something very similar to Zoom. Then we've got Eunjong. How do you pronounce that?
Eunjong.
Eunjong.
Yes.
Okay, Lee. That's a bit easier. That one I can do. Senior Policy Advisor at E3G. We've got Tom Wills, Director of Trade Justice Movement, and Lisa Johnson, who's a partner at Curtis. That seems quite short, actually, for a law firm. It's normally Curtis, Robert Curtis, Curtis and John, and Curtis LLLB, B, ba, ba. You know, so is there a full title for that?
Curtis Millay, Mosul.
Put the microphone to your mouth so we can hear.
Sorry, yes, it's Curtis Millay, Prevost, Colt, and Mosul.
Wow. Mosul is what you drink at the end of the day, is it? Or is that something? Okay, fine. So let's come to our one friend here first, E3G. Let's start with you. Many might not know about this, but tell it to the people that have never heard about it before. What is ISDS, and why is it a barrier for climate action?
Yeah, so ISDS is an acronym for Investor State Dispute Settlement, as you said before. It's a special dispute settlement mechanism to resolve dispute between foreign investors and states. And it's a very common feature of a network of more than 2,500 investment treaties and or free trade agreements globally. And what it does is basically allows foreign investors to sue governments if they believe the government measure has breached obligation to treat investors in a certain way and therefore undermine their business interest. What's interesting is this is very one-way system. So while foreign investors are allowed to sue the government can't do it, nor national investors. So why is that particularly barrier to climate action is although ISDS, the impact of ISDS goes beyond climate policies and it can affect any public policies like public health and tax mechanism. But then in the context of climate crisis, it has starting to gain more attention because it basically allows fossil fuel investors, so it grants fossil fuel investors excessive protection against government policies, including climate policies and fossil fuel phase out. Yeah, and there are real cases, so it's not just threats, there are real cases. And the fear of very expensive lawsuits, here we're talking about like billions of dollars, can delay government's climate action. And just facing one case, a government's like financial ability to fight climate change can be undermined. So in essence, it's a mechanism that basically penalizes governments who are trying to take action on climate while compensating fossil fuel investors.
Just one quick question. I mean, these go back a long time, don't they? They didn't just magically pop out of the ether last week. I mean, they're going back, what, to the 1980s, 70s, 60s, 50s? Do they even predate the Second World War? I simply don't know. But so they probably were not intended to actually allow the fossil fuel industry to sue companies that want to exit fossil fuels, but they have, because of their legal power, being used and therefore, in a sense, abused by those business interests that want to delay climate action. And would that be the right summary of that in shorthand?
Yes, because it's not designed to deal with the climate system. Climate challenges.
But the law is the law, right? So it's not, it's not human in the sense. It's there, it's created, and then people use it for their own interests. Yeah. Okay. Good. Lisa, you're a practitioner. You're engaging in arbitration tribunals and defending states. States being not just the United States, but countries. How does ISDS cases, how do they play out in your practice?
It's a great question. And yeah, there's a lot to it in many different ways I think I could take it, but maybe I'll focus on a few of the aspects that make ISDS different from other types of disputes that we might be familiar with in domestic law or international law. And there are a number of features of ISDS that I think make it unique and remarkable and powerful and problematic in this sense. One is when there is a claim. It can be based on kind of any government conduct. It can be based on local action, national level action. It can be based on conduct by the parliament, by a court, even the Supreme Court, by regulators. It can be based on preliminary action, final action, kind of you name it, you can kind of frame it as a claim. Some tribunals will also take all of the action combined and say, well, you know, if we look at the totality of the circumstances, we don't believe that this was fair treatment or equitable treatment, and we consider that it was a breach of the treaty. So that is something that's relatively unique. Also, what is not a defense? A government can't say, well, I took this action in the public interest in accordance with domestic law or even in accordance with international law, and therefore I won't be liable. None of those things are a defense. You can still be liable under the treaty for any of those issues. Another problem that we see is that there is no system of precedent. So you don't really know what the law requires of you. You can have one case decided where maybe a government does phase out fossil fuels, a company sues them for that action, the company loses. But that doesn't mean that another company can't try that exact same claim and then win the next time around. So there's a lot of uncertainty. There is also no meaningful route to appeal. Even if a tribunal gets the law wrong, gets an important fact wrong, an outcome determinative fact, you don't have a place to go to correct the outcome. And then maybe the key thing is the damages. And I think that goes to what you were saying, is that kind of unlike maybe what we see under domestic law or other areas of international law, when a company sues, the typical remedy that they ask for is money. And while the first decade of claims, 1994 to 2003, the average claim size was about 25 million. Fast forward to the time period between 2014 and 2023, there the claim size had increased by a factor of about 10. So it's about 250 million is the average claim, and we're seeing claims in the billions of dollars. So of course, that makes governments very nervous about the prospect of claims and liability.
And you're dealing with some of these cases, are you?
Exactly. So my practice is representing governments when they get threats of suit and suits.
Okay. But we're going to come back to this. So we're just letting everybody have a little bit of oxygen at the beginning before we can start a proper conversation. Helena, you've been an environmental advocate for many, many years, and you recently launched something called the Real Economy. That's an initiative that addresses phasing out these ISDSs as one of its solutions. Why is this important for you, Helena?
I've been at this for 50 years, and what I've seen worldwide is that we're talking here about the relationship between global corporations and banks and national governments. So I think we have to recognize that this is a very, very important and serious issue, not just regarding climate. We're talking about countries being sued by global corporations if they want to ban a toxic chemical, if they want to increase the minimum wage, if they want to warn about the hazards of tobacco smoking, etc. And this is not something that was created by global corporations. When we look at this at a broader and deeper level, we see that the issue has been that we have been trained to believe that increasing global trade is the only way to grow the economy. So we have trained economists and experts of every kind going along with an agenda that is really becoming the reason why we're talking about the poly crisis, why we hear all this talk about that. We've lost democracy, and it's been particularly dramatic since the 80s, when the new push for globalization came from global corporations, that as entities simply need to push dependence on global corporations in order for them to grow. And I want to make it very clear that from my point of view, this is not about good guys and bad guys, but it is about a system that we need to step back and look at honestly And our campaign, which we're starting in Sweden, is about raising awareness so that we will get democratic pressure on government to not only withdraw from ISDS, but to examine the fundamental problem about ever more dependence on global traders is not a healthy way to grow the economy. So we think we're now at a stage when people are ready to hear this. We need to look at this as a process that has been increasing unemployment and poverty at the same time that it's been increasing pollution of every kind, including increases in climate emissions. We are not getting an accurate narrative around climate because global corporations are essentially framing the argument. They're pushing for this focus on carbon, which allows them to trade carbon, get richer, while we do nothing about limiting fossil fuel consumption. They're also pushing for seeing nuclear power and renewable energy. And it's really important that the average politician and the average citizen steps back to look at this. So I really hope a campaign started that will not be demonizing people in these corporations, not even the CEOs, just looking honestly at this system and starting rapidly to move away from what is essentially a global empire of interlinked banks and corporations that are shaping policy, shaping the narrative, and the politics are supported by both left and right. So this is not a left and right political issue. This is a more fundamental.
Okay, super, super, Helena. Thank you very much for your comments there. Let's go to Tom now. So the trade justice movement has been advocating against ISDS with governments and members of parliament in the UK. You've described the UK as the worst country in Europe for perpetuating the harms of ISDS. Please tell us a little bit more about this, Tom.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the UK has about 80 treaties with other countries around the world that contains ISDS, and UK companies are really active, passionate users of ISDS when it comes to bringing cases against other countries. They've done that more than 100 times, and 56 of those have been bought by UK companies that are engaged in mining or fossil fuels. And it's worth just taking a minute to kind of think about how this is justified by the UK government, which supports ISDS and is including ISDS in new agreements that it's negotiating right now, and by the, how it's justified by the companies involved. What they used to say was that this was a crucial prerequisite to drive foreign investment. You have ISDS, people have the confidence to invest, the money flows. Decades of academic scholarship has failed to demonstrate that link. In fact, some countries, when they leave ISDS, actually see their flows of investment go up. So now they say it's about protecting UK companies abroad from arbitrary or capricious treatment by governments that don't respect the rule of law or that act in unpredictable ways, don't have good court systems, etc. Now that's really difficult to bear out when we've currently got cases where UK companies are suing places like the Netherlands or Ireland over their attempts to phase out oil and gas extraction. So really what we're left with is a situation in which companies, a minority of companies that nonetheless have based their business model on unsustainable extraction, are lobbying the government successfully to include within trade agreements a mechanism through which they can extract sometimes billions of dollars of public money as compensation when their business model is undermined by urgent and necessary regulation and legislation. So we really need to do something about this. And fortunately, there's loads of examples of governments that are starting to move against the ISDS system. And I guess that's something we'll be getting into.
So this is very interesting because we've got a country like the UK, which by no means is perfect in lots of ways, but is in general, closed its last coal-fired power station not so long ago, standing semi-strong against those calls to open more fields in the North Sea after the bizarre stuff that was going on in the or still going on in the Straits of Hormuz. So on some levels, really doing quite well on climate change. Is it because the right hand doesn't know what the left hand's doing? So that you've got the Department of, it's now net zero, isn't it? Here, and you've maybe got foreign affairs, and then you've got trade, or is it because a classic government's not joined up situation, or is it worse than that, or just what's your perception?
Yeah, I mean, I think that could be part of the problem. We've got a business and trade department that is in existence to make life easier for our companies that are trading overseas, and they're maybe not taking into consideration the green goals that the government more generally is trying to pursue. I think one of the things that's beginning to drive this home and beginning to encourage kind of slightly more unsiloed thinking across Whitehall is that the UK for the first time is actually facing ISDS actions. We're currently facing a legal case being brought by the investors behind the coal mine that was going to be built in West Cumbria.
Where are those investors from?
Those investors are based in the Cayman Islands, a tax haven, and they're using...
Are they British, but they've got their thing in the Cayman Islands, or are they from another country?
They're using the Singapore-UK investment treaty, which was signed back in 1975, so it's completely unsuited to the modern world. And they are claiming £300 million in compensation from the UK Treasury as compensation for the fact that their coal mine, which was supposedly a net zero coal mine, was defeated in the High Courts after action from local campaigners in Cumbria. We were going to have the first UK coal mine for 30 years. That was defeated by community power, and those investors are now licking their wounds and looking for whatever they can do to get some money out of that situation. So it's a completely unsustainable situation, and hopefully this is the kind of thing that will make the UK government and other governments in the global north sit up and realize that actually ISDS was never in the interest of the global south, and it's now no longer in the interests of the capital exporting countries that are actually trying to do something about climate.
Well, we're in a new era, aren't we? Where, I mean, you only have to look at what's been happening in the last few months to realize that the toxic impact of fossil fuels on the global economy. So we're in a very different time. And so the law should be reflecting the realities of the world, and 1.5 degrees centigrade almost lost. And, look what's happening in the UK this week with red warnings at 38 degrees in London. So I suppose the question here really is what do we do? So, I mean, Lisa, the ISDS system has fundamental flaws. Tell us a little bit more about these, but tell us also what can we do to reform this situation, because we're looking, I think people are now becoming aware, or smaller, but increasingly ripples in the movement of environment and climate are understanding ISDS, and we need to resolve this quite urgently. What's your perception here?
I mean, I think there are many aspects of the system that make it very challenging to reform. I mean, I do agree that it's fundamentally flawed, and kind of one inherent problem with it that you can't really reform around is that it's just inherently unequal. And as that example from the West Cumbria mine shows, you can have a kind of a legal dispute playing out domestically where you have local communities, local courts, local politicians, local companies, all understanding kind of the rules of the game within which they're playing. One actor doesn't like the outcome, and they can take the dispute out of the country to a separate forum and try and get different relief. So what do you do about it? I mean, I think there are actions that states can take unilaterally, which include unilateral termination, jointly, which can be joint termination or amendment, and at the multilateral level. There have been ongoing reforms within the UN system for about the last 10 years. What has come out of it so far is nothing really that would be a game changer. But in the meantime, over those past 10 years, we've seen about 650 claims filed, which is over 40% of all claims in existence. So while we've been kind of talking about reform for 10 years at the UN, we've seen a lot of claims continue to be brought. So I think that does kind of send the message that something really needs to change a little bit more urgently. And in terms of what that is, I mean, I do think that termination is a viable option for states to really think about, that the costs of the treaties are very high, the legal risks are huge, but the benefits have not been shown to be commensurate with those risks. So I think that's a responsible strategy for states. In terms of the multilateral reform, one proposal is to develop a court where, rather than going to arbitration, where you have kind of an ad hoc group of arbitrators deciding the cases, you'll have something that looks more like a panel of judges deciding it. And maybe that will change some of the incentives, but the risk is too that you bake in the current status quo, you bake in all of the problems, and you make it harder to change those. So it's a big challenge, but I think looking at the possibility of termination is one that I think really needs to be taken seriously.
Yeah, you co-authored or were involved in a report, weren't you, just a few months ago, where this was looked at, and there are some countries that have been cancelling some of these ISDS treaties. I thought the UK had cancelled a few as well, but maybe I got that wrong. But I mean, what is the pattern here right now?
UK has left the Energy Charter Treaty. We're seeing more countries like taking action on it, not just global South countries, but also global North country. So Australia, who is the co-host of COP31 this year, is, for example, we can say most progressive of developed nations in terms of ISDS policy. So they have a policy not to include any ISDS provisions in new trade agreements or bilateral investment treaties, and they're trying to reform or even remove those provisions in the existing treaties. So while, there are more countries trying to do something, but we're also witnessing some hypocrisy, like within country like UK, who decide to leave Energy Charter Treaty, but they're still maintaining 80 other treaties because that is their benefit, is in their benefit to keep those treaties because because of the UK investors investing abroad and is protecting their investors.
But with new treaties, couldn't you? I mean, could you have new ISDS treaties between countries or groups of countries where you specify in this treaty this doesn't cover oil and gas or coal, right? Could you do that? Is that an answer to this, or is it not? Or, I mean, no, it's not. No.
I mean, you could absolutely do that, but it would not solve the fundamental problem at the heart of the ISDS system, which is that it essentially provides private investors, international investors, with a mechanism through which to exert power over democratic government policy. And you can get rid of that as in terms of how it applies to oil and gas investments, but it still might apply to mining, or it still might apply to attempts to, I don't know, bring water into public ownership. There's so many different ways that the ISDS system has been used to exert power by investors over governments, and I think we really need to see a kind of movement away from that in the round, rather than trying to kind of deal with specific aspects of the broader problem.
Helena, is yours a global campaign? It's not just the UK. How do you campaign on this more specifically?
Essentially, about fairness, you're saying yourself, you've heard about it. This, to us, is the big problem, that most democratically elected, supposed representatives of people do not know about it, and nor do the movements, the people who are working so hard to try to fight poverty, injustice, climate issues. The lack of awareness is really what's kept this alive. We need to realize that what we're talking about is that globally active businesses, banks and others, have no rules. But removing rules from them and allowing them to rule over governments that in any way threaten their profits. Now, these are the same rules that don't pay tax generally. And in the meanwhile, everyone else operating within the national, whether it's ordinary citizens, non-profit groups, government agencies, or businesses, are all subject to regulation, often very clumsy government regulation and taxation. So we have such a ridiculously unfair playing field. And what we're talking about here is goes way beyond the left and right discourse. It was so urgent that we start looking at this difference between global players versus local or place-based businesses. We could now choose either to create a global government or to simply decentralize business. We insist that businesses are place-based. So Mitsubishi goes back to Japan, General Motors to America, Volvo to Sweden, and they're subject to democratically accountable institutions. This is really what we need. It's very urgent because the moment AI, as with algorithms, will continue to further this inequity and the massive destruction of the natural world, but also very clear impoverishment in every country. The middle class even the middle class is working harder and harder, and it's not only more financially poor, but also time poor. And that time poverty is a very frightening issue when it comes to the need to step back, look a little more holistic at these issues. What's wonderful about our campaign is we are offering a big picture that can truly unite across left and right, across white versus people of color versus global south, global north. It's a uniting
I'll have
and
to
a
hurry you
very
here a little, Helena. I'll have to hurry you. Thank you. Thank you.
okay.
That's good.
Yeah, well, it's
Thank you for
very
your point.
but we
That's
need
great.
time to get it out. So
Yeah.
I said my piece.
It's the show's called We Don't Have Time, so we've got about 6 or 7 minutes left. Yeah, but good points. Let's talk everybody through this. I mean, what are we going to do about it, right? At the moment, it seems that we are. The problem has been identified. Obviously, more awareness needs to be done. Of course, government's always changing all the time, so a new bunch come in and start managing their country and probably ignore ISDS because it's got other things on their plates. How do we keep this on the top of the agenda? But more practically, I mean, you indicated that there are ways of, cancelling, retiring, terminating was the word I think you used. So we need Arnold Schwarzenegger right now. And maybe all three of you here. Number one, what do we do now between now and COP31? What do we do through COP31? Some kind of timetable, some kind of action strategy. You're in the UK, so we can talk about the UK, but what about globally?
Yeah, so I think there's two kind of key figures that I always cite. One is $83 billion US, and that's how much fossil fuel companies have managed to claim in public money via the ISDS system. Mm-hmm. So essentially we're in a situation where if you want to do climate action, you have to pay for the climate action, but you also have to compensate the fossil fuel companies who've profited so handsomely over the previous decades.
Yep, we got that. I understand it's an absolute disgrace.
And we need to keep on hitting that
I know
point.
It's very bad. So what are we going to do?
The other point, 300. Yeah. In the last decade, we've terminated 300 treaties containing ISDS. So this is happening all the time. Governments are moving away from this, and we need to make sure that we're highlighting to our governments the risks. They see the benefits. It makes life easier for our companies when they go and sue countries abroad. But we need to make sure we talk about the risks to climate action, to democracy, to the rule of law in this country. And that, I think, is the thing that's really going to change minds within kind of government.
Right. Okay. So we have to, what you're saying is, by building awareness, by revealing what's going on, we can shame our governments into actually doing something about it. What would they do then after that? What would they do? Would they go to her law firm and run up another big bill doing something else? I mean, what does the government actually do?
Every investment treaty has a provision in it that talks about how you terminate it.
Yeah.
And usually you write to the partner of the investment treaty and you say, "Dear Colombia, here's our notice. In 12 months, this treaty will no longer apply."
Okay.
That's absolutely possible, and it's happening all the time.
Right. So that's what has to happen. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a very sensible and important strategy, right? That should be part of the mix. Since I already mentioned termination and would agree with that, I do think it's important to consider other options that are also on the table that can be taken now. One is, you mentioned the treaties have been around for decades. Why is it now that we're only talking about them? And it's because I think the interpretations have really developed in a way, the treaties have been used and interpreted in ways that states never intended. And how does that happen? It's the interpreters, right? The arbitrators who are issuing decisions on what the treaties mean.
Mm-hmm.
And there are things that states can do now to try and shape those interpretations. So the UK, as the home state of many investors who are using the treaties, can actually be much more active in the cases its investors bring and say, actually, that is not what our treaty is meant to do. That is not the type of protection that it's meant to provide. So I think that there's a responsibility for states to really become more aware and more engaged on those issues.
Okay, that's a good point, I think, as well. And the UK is also one of the world's great, if not one of the world's greatest hubs for the legal profession, doing both good and bad in the world. So, yeah. What's your perception on this? What are we going to do right now, right here? How are we going to sort this mess out?
I'm approaching it more like from global perspective and politically speaking. So although ISDS agenda has been gaining attention and named by lots of international experts, it had remained overlooked in international climate negotiations and climate discussion. And as you said in the opening, what Santa Marta conference did was to put it like at the heart of the transitioning away from fossil fuels agenda. But what we are still lacking is like official recognition by states that it is a problem and they need to address it. It's not happening yet. So what we think is important and can happen is a group of like-minded countries coming forward to announce, like politically, like through something like political declaration, that this is ISDS poses great risk to fossil fuel phase out and is something they need to address urgently, and that they are committed to addressing that. So we think this year there is opportunity for some progress in the venue like COP31. I mentioned before about Australia is one of the most progressive developed economy in this approach, in their stance on ISDS, and they're also co-host of the COP31. So we think there is a opportunity,
there's a window there of opportunity, that's for sure. I suppose I pose one last bizarre question, which is, could there be actually a very positive story in this, that you're seeing so much suing right now by oil and gas companies or fossil fuel companies, because they know the way renewables are now starting to take over positively in all the economies of the world, that the game is maybe, the game may be over very soon for them. They're worried about stranded assets, so they're trying to maximize the amount of legal action of anybody remotely trying to sue them right now. And they think, okay, maybe we can make some big bucks out of this and then maybe retire gracefully from the battlefield. Or it might just, have I smoked something that just... well, you're looking at me as if nobody's got an answer to that one. Like, I wish it were that case, Nick.
Yes, I mean that, and I think also the worry that we have is that governments are scared of getting hit with a big bill. So even if they're committed to climate action,
right?
New Zealand, Denmark, ministers in those countries have both admitted to having delayed or diluted climate action for fear of getting sued. So it's not entirely smooth sailing from here. We need to get rid of ISDS, and we need to be aware that it kind of has this chilling effect on global climate action.
But it is clear that some of the European oil and gas companies are no longer going out drilling anymore, because maybe they know the game's up in terms of fossil fuels as the most dominant form of energy in the world. That could be a positive thing.
I mean, I think one problem with that is that we're not maybe just concerned with ISDS chilling government action, but it also might have an impact in the way the polluter pays principle plays out, right? And that ultimately you shift the cost of fossil fuels onto the public as opposed to the companies.
So they having to pick up the bill.
Right,
yeah.
Exactly.
I mean, they're picking up the bill right now, they just have to pick up more bills. Yeah, okay. Yep, that's probably your thoughts as well, yes?
Yeah, well, I also think like fossil fuel companies, like you said, like we can't prove, but can maximize trying to get most out of the current system.
Yeah, until it's gone. Yeah. Good. Helena, we'll leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for coming in all the way from the West Country of England. And I hope it's a little bit less hot down there than it is in London. And thank you to our wonderful guests who are live in the studio here. And I'm sure this story is going to run and run and run, but hopefully not forever. And so let's see what happens at COP31. Okay, well done. Thank you very much. So welcome to, with another wonderful guest here at London Climate Action Week 2026 from the premises of Sustainable Ventures here at County Hall, literally a stone's throw from the House of Commons on the other side of the River Thames. Climate change affects us in all kinds of different ways, economically and environmentally, but it also affects our health. And indeed, the impact of global warming on health was one of the major themes at this recent conference in Colombia, held in Santa Marta, where we had the transitioning away from fossil fuels conference, the first one. And of course, we're looking forward to that being picked up, hopefully at the next UN Climate Conference in Turkey, hosted by Australia and Turkey, and also at this meeting next year in Tuvalu in the Pacific Island region, which will be the second conference on the transitioning away from fossil fuels. Here to help us talk a little bit more about this topic, we have with us Marina Romanello, who is the Executive Director of the Lancet Countdown, and you were in Santa Marta too, because I remember interviewing you there. Marina, as we said, you were in Santa Marta. Looking through the lens of where you were and what was going on, do you still feel very positive about what happened there?
Thank you, Nick, and thank you so much once again for having me. So Santa Marta was an interesting experience, wasn't it? Because it was the first time that we saw countries come together in a coalition of the willing to talk about the barriers and how to overcome them in terms of phasing out fossil fuels, which is what we urgently need to do to keep this planet livable. So it was a really hopeful moment, I think. There were issues with the conference. There were all sorts of equity issues that were considered at the conference. But I think all in all, it opened a new avenue for progress, which is really important. It's yet to be seen where we go from there. So we haven't yet seen actual meaningful progress. We've seen some commitments, from France in terms of their targets to phase out fossil fuels. We've seen a roadmap put forward for Colombia. But we need to see action, and we need to see that action delivered in ways that protect people's health, people's well-being, people's lives, and people's survival above everything. So we have some cautious hope. The UN Climate Conference will be a challenging one this year because there's a lot of pushback in terms of a global roadmap. But you know what? When we have countries pushing forward, that's what we need to see. We need to see progress on all ends. And if the country is the way to go and country level commitments are the way to go, then that is very much welcome.
We had a couple of people on chatting about Santa Marta from other aspects earlier today. And I said, have you seen other countries interested in joining this coalition of the willing, as everyone calls it? And they said, yes, they expect that there will be announcements coming indeed before and also maybe at COP31 in Turkey, that with countries coming forward saying they're joining this kind of Santa Marta concept, this initiative. So fingers crossed on that one. The Lancet Countdown, I mean, it's been an amazing project for the last decade. You're in your 10th year. Can you point to successes in that? And can you point to things that maybe are less pleasing?
Yeah, well, look, I'm very privileged to head the Lancet Countdown on Health and Climate Change. It's a global initiative funded by Wellcome, and we bring together about 300 researchers from around the world. So one thing that to me is marvelous about the past 10 years is that we build this community of researchers that are contributing their expertise to track progress on health and climate change and provide accountability mechanisms to point at where we're seeing the impacts, where we're seeing the opportunities for health of climate action, which are multiple and enormous, and where we're seeing countries lagging behind and the threats that those delays imply to our health, our survival. And having that scientific community is incredibly important because that's the only way in which we can really keep accountable. And we're seeing science being threatened all around the world. And I think it's now more than ever that we need to remember that science brings us knowledge, brings us truth, and allows us to speak truth to power. That said, over the past 10 years, the Lancet Countdown's full name is Tracking Progress on Health and Climate Change. And if you think back at what we were 10 years, the Paris Agreement was just entering into force. So it was built with the hope of tracking progress as we delivered the goals of the Paris Agreement and all the health benefits and opportunities that we would be delivering through those commitments if we deliver them through a health lens. And unfortunately, much of what we've seen is enormous delays, unjustifiable delays in tackling our greenhouse gas emissions, in adapting to climate change. And as a result, we keep on monitoring the growing health impacts and hazards of climate change. So as we get to the 10-year, it's a moment of reflection and of thinking about things that have worked, but mostly things that haven't and why. So that looking forward, we can start changing the way that we work, changing the way that we communicate and engage to ensure that the next 10 years truly drive progress, because we cannot afford not to go down a route of accelerated action.
So is it that the health agenda was not really embraced, or is it that the climate agenda wasn't really embraced, or was it a mixture of both of them?
It's interesting. I have my theory.
Yeah.
And I can tell you, if you look at the first ever report of the IPCC, of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, put together by UNEP and WMO to bring together the science around climate change back in the, I think it was the 90s or 80s.
It was, they actually met. I tell you what happened. The head of the WMO and the head of UNEP met round the back of conference room 1 at UNEP in Nairobi in 1988, was
88,
it?
I think it was.
And,
the APCC
yeah, and they said, we've got to have a global scientific assessment, bring all nations together, because if we just keep using Western science, the other parts of the world won't agree with it, so we need to bring this. And I think the first report might have been 1992 or 1991, just before the Rio summit, and helped fuel the treaty of the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change being agreed in Rio de Janeiro.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it.
Okay.
Exactly right. So that first IPCC report has a chapter on health. And plus minus, we know much more today, but the core of it was already there. So we have known about the health impacts of climate change for very, very long. We have known about the health implications of climate action for very, very long. The Lancet published its first ever commission, big scientific reports in 2009 on climate change. The first ever medical commission was on climate change. And it exposed the health impacts of climate change and the health imperative of climate action. And just in 2015, we had the update commission showing the huge health co-benefits and the huge health opportunities of climate action. So this is not new. We've known it all along. But why have we detached health from the global conversation about climate change? Why have we made it about polar bears and forests and things that people like, but it's not really in the core of who we are? And when we talk about climate change, it's so important to be clear that we're talking about the health of the people that we love in every country, the health of our children, the survival of our children, the opportunities for healthy lives and to enjoy the planet that we've enjoyed so far in ways that support a prosperous future. And that is what's at risk here today. So when we talk about climate change, we have to understand we're talking about human health, humans' well-being, and human survival. And we cannot detach ourselves from that conversation. We cannot afford to talk about polar bears anymore.
I absolutely understand the point you're making. And I suppose in part because what's rapidly changing is it might have been that when it came to climate change and health, it was considered like this is an air pollution issue.
Yes.
Yeah. The burning of fossil fuels for sure, but an air pollution issue, you know, particulates and oxides of nitrogen and all these other things, right? And then suddenly now, with temperatures rising and also, you know, droughts and floods, the whole dynamic of the health climate change nexus is changing before our very eyes into a much more acute emergency. Sorry, that's my perspective. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
look, I think it's coming home for so many people, right? We're here in London during London Climate Action Week, and we're seeing soaring temperatures. People really, really are suffering and are feeling this very unusual, extreme weather affecting their health, affecting their well-being, affecting their livelihoods. We've seen the catastrophic floods in Valencia a year and a half ago. We've seen these extreme weather events becoming common currency, and this is unprecedented and is the early symptoms of a planet that is very rapidly heating, where we have so far not managed to meet the commitments that we made under the Paris Agreement. We know that overshoot about 1.5 is now inevitable and probably even further than that. So we are now experiencing what happens when that climate on which our health depends, our food systems depend, our infectious disease risk depends, is starting to destabilize. And that's the underpinning of health and well-being, is the environment that sustains our health and well-being. So it's really starting to manifest, but it's important to remember we're at 1.3 degrees of heating and we're already seeing how bad it's getting. This is just the beginning unless we take urgent action, coordinated action across all systems.
And what do health ministers say when you meet them, or environment ministers when you meet them? Do they all nod their heads and agree, and then go home and do something, but not enough? I mean, where is it?
Look, the problem that we're having is this fracture, right, of government or the siloing of government. So when we speak to the ministers of health, their main remit, the main focus for them is what's happening to the health systems. And that is where they really, really see the need for urgent action. Because in all countries around the world, you see it very acutely in low-middle income countries, but even in high-income countries, the UK is a perfect example of that. We're starting to see the health system being acutely affected by climate change impacts, acute and slow onset, those low ones. And ministers of health are starting to see their health sector grappling with these events. We see in extreme heat days, even here in the UK, our emergency services being overwhelmed by the demand. Our healthcare providers that are operating and our healthcare professionals in buildings that overheat and that need to take breaks and that they see their performance impaired. And we're seeing the cost to our health systems and the need to change the way that we diagnose infectious diseases, because we're starting to see the spread of diseases that we are not used to seeing. We have to build capacity to our healthcare professionals for them to be able to respond to this changing climate. And that is often what healthcare ministers of health think about when they think about climate change, because it's such an acute demand on their budgets and on the system. But we're also seeing them more and more engaging with mitigation, with the need to transform our health systems to operate in a zero emission context, because we know that we cannot afford for a healthy future to keep on down a route of high emissions. Granted, we need to do much more, and there's still a lot of way to go in terms of building that awareness for health ministers, and especially ensuring that health is not just a problem of health ministers, but that we bring the Minister of Environment, the Minister of Energy, Urban Planning, all together to think about how we make our cities, our homes, our countries healthier, climate resilient, and above everything, zero emissions.
So, a couple of things. COP31 in Turkey, you'll be there, I'm sure, and the Lancet Countdown will be there. Is there anything that you're hearing, that there's statements that are being made that makes you think that they might take this topic seriously? Or is it just that we're going to have 35%? What's the target now for electrification? I can't remember. But anyway, yeah.
Look, we're going to have a health day again, which is important to put health into the agenda. But to me, when we think about kind of what COP can deliver, COP needs to deliver actual progress. We just came from the Bonn intersessional negotiations.
Right. Okay, sorry about that.
And
I've been there many times in the last
that's it, right?
20 odd years.
It hasn't been very encouraging. We've seen critical negotiations items that failed, that did not reach an agreement. And the risk that we're facing is these deadlocks that we're meeting between countries, in which there's political interests, is interest from private sector, is interest from the fossil fuel industry. And unless we bypass those to enable a prosperous economy on which health depends, healthier environments, unless we bypass those barriers, we will not see meaningful progress. So having agreements in COPs is not what drives action. What drives actions is what we do with the awareness and the agreements that we reach. We were talking about Santa Marta. I think that's a good example of us not needing to be limited by international agreements and negotiations. We're now in a phase in which we need implementation, no more commitments, but actual implementation.
Yes. Finally, the Lancet Countdown itself, 10th anniversary year, does it carry on? Does it stop here and say, okay, we did what we were asked to do, wish we could have had more positive KPIs, a business person would say, whatever they are. But that, no, or do you actually now go onto a different trajectory. So, yeah.
So with the Lancet Countdown, we've recently got new funding from Wellcome to keep on going at least until 2029. So we're still
very good news
on the road until at least 2029. But obviously, with this kind of 10-year stock take, we're rethinking how we do things and how we operate globally, and thinking a lot more about putting our focus through regional centers. We have 6 regional centers established, and we're establishing new ones as well. And those are engaging at a country and subnational level, drawing on the knowledge of local communities and data that is locally available to ensure that the data that we deliver can be really useful to decision makers, to those that implement change. So that is one of the changes that we're doing. But obviously, we always say, well, the Lancet Countdown is an independent scientific monitoring system that provides accountability and allows us to track progress. I wish we did not need a Lancet Countdown.
Yeah.
I wish we would have delivered enough progress and have enough accountability and enough transparent monitoring systems within countries and international organizations that the Lancet Countdown would be obsolete. It does not look that way so far, Nick, I'm afraid, and that means that we are probably here for the long run.
Well, I must say, I wish we didn't have another COP 31 or 32 or 33. I thought we could solve the problem and, as you say, just implement, right? Which was what was supposed to happen after Paris. And I can't believe we're still talking. And
we know
actually
the
talking going backwards as well, right? I mean, some of these governments are going backwards on a few things. On the other side, renewable energy is powering ahead. It's unbelievable. I mean, we live in a world in which if you combine renewable energy and storage, there is no place on earth where fossil fuels economically can compete.
Makes no sense.
So that's really fantastic, right?
Absolutely.
So again, we've got this kind of, who said it? Was it the Colombian minister who said we live in a world with contradictions.
Yeah.
And we have these contradictions, both negative and positive.
It's interesting because it's such an easy argument to make, isn't it? We have all the arguments to face up fossil fuels, to adapt to climate change, to build a healthier future. Investment in adaptation pays many times over the costs of implementation, many times over, especially if you think about health. That is the most cost-effective, the highest return on investment. When you think about the fossil fuel sector, fossil fuels are more expensive. We're seeing now what's happening once again with another global energy crisis. We've seen this already in Ukraine. Now again, we're facing another energy crisis due to global geopolitical conflict. And we're seeing people suffering with high energy bills, grappling to pay the bills, a cost of living crisis, and governments turning to subsidies once again. We're registered at the peak of the Ukraine energy crisis. We registered over $1 trillion in just 1 year in net fossil fuel subsidies. And that is happening again.
Yes.
So countries are putting this enormous amount of resources from public monies to subsidize and to keep energy affordable because fossil fuel prices have rocketed.
If you think about it, the argument of the fossil fuel industry always was that the thing about renewables is that they're intermittent, and unreliable. Well, I have to say that this year we found out that fossil fuels are intermittent and unreliable, especially when the country starts attacking one of the big countries producing it, right? So, in fact, somebody said to me that all solar panels and wind turbines should have on the side a little slogan that says, guaranteed to be hormones free. Used to be hormone free, but Hormuz means the Straits of Hormuz. So this is a BBC friend of mine, or a retired BBC correspondent, was saying that to me. But it's true, right? And yes, you're right. We're having spent all this money to deal with the problems caused by being too dependent on fossil fuels. But you've seen the other response, which is people saying, that's it, right? We really need to accelerate so fast now to get away from this. So maybe
the fossil fuel companies are making windfall profits as well.
Of course.
So we're not only subsidizing it with the cost of energy going up, but they're making windfall profits. It's outrageous.
It's a bit strange being a human being sometimes, isn't it?
It is very, well,
these decisions that get made.
There's some power dynamics at play, that's for sure.
That's for sure. Good. Hugh from University College London is not with us. He clearly can't make it. There's some connection problem. But it's been super to have you with us again, as usual. And it's very challenging what you're doing, but you keep a dynamic and positive perspective on this when you go through it, and we have to do, because this is something that we can't negotiate on.
Literally,
to go
our
backwards.
lives, our health depend on
Yes,
it.
of course.
Ours and that of our children. So we
Super.
have to.
Thank you very much for
Thank you
being
so
on.
much,
We don't
Nick.
have time.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.